Thank you, Mr. Frisch. I just want to take this opportunity to announce our new deputy clerk, Kevin Jackson, who is here with us. He is a former deputy clerk from the Planning Commission. And as you know, we also have Tara Petrovic, who is also our second deputy clerk. So we are now almost fully staffed.
Yay. Congratulations. I think we all look forward to working with you both. In order to comply with Section 2.2/3712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed meeting on October 10th, 2023, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during the closed meeting. Do I have a motion? Ms. Cohen, do I have a second? Ms. Omesh, all those in favor? Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and myself. All opposed? All right, that is unanimous for those who are here. And now, Ms. Tolan has submitted a written request to attend virtually this afternoon for a personal reason. All those in favor of allowing Ms. Tolan to participate virtually, raise your hand. Ms. Tolan, sorry, Ms. Tolan, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, and myself. Anybody against? All right, anybody abstaining? All right, welcome, Ms. Tolan. Do you want to try your microphone?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very clearly, Ms. Tolan. And with that, Ms. Tolan is actually going to get us started by setting the table for today. Ms. Tolan?
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for your hard work already today. So today we are poised, I'm hoping, for our last work session on our topic of strategic governance. We've had 6 on putting together our strategic plan, and we've had another 4 on executive expectations and board superintendent roles. So I'm hoping after today we can just move on to the implementation of our strategic plan and holding Dr. Reed accountable for accomplishing the goals that we have set forth under this plan. Any additional and very specific changes or updates that need to be made to our governance manual to support this will be moved on to our governance committee, and they can work on that over the next several months. So for today, we've done, as we mentioned, a lot of work to set us up to have transparent monitoring of the superintendent and to ensure that the division is accomplishing the work that the board and the community has charged the superintendent with accomplishing through our strategic plan goals and our executive expectations. The goal of today is twofold. One, to make sure that we can use the tools that we have put together effectively, and close out our final discussion on how we're going to be monitoring this work at board meetings and how it will support us to hold the superintendent accountable and to perform the superintendent's full evaluation in June. For each of our monitoring reports, one for each executive expectation and one for each goal, board members will use their judgment to determine if the evidence Dr. Reed is providing for each of these is sufficient. Please note there are ongoing efforts around all of these measurements that will continue to hone in as we move forward with our strategic plan. As board members complete the full evaluation of Dr. Reed each June, notes that have been taken throughout the year can be referenced, and these various monitoring reports will be referenced, as well as just taking a picture of how the work has evolved over the whole year. And today we'll look at the connections quickly between the monitoring reports and the evaluation criteria that is given to us by the Virginia Department of Education. Our second objective is to review the existing language that we have in our governance manual related to board superintendent roles and determine if we have consensus of the board to just keep the governance manual the way it is, or to just reorganize the language that is already existing there, or determine if we want to move forward with the governance committee to make any additional changes to the information that's in there. So we'll do this, we'll have a presentation, and then some discussion around the first item, and then we'll, as time is allowing us, do a little bit of a breakout into small groups where we can discuss the second objective for today. For board members, we'll be looking at 2-minute time limits on board comments as we move through each of these sections. Our strategic governance work this year has been an opportunity to refresh our existing governance language to make sure that we are in alignment with the strategic plan that we work so hard with the community to put in place, and to just make sure that we have transparent monitoring and evaluation of the superintendent against that plan. So thank you very much for everyone being here today, and I will turn it over to our Stephen Dustin and to our Vice Chair, Mr. Frisch, to move us through the meeting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. We now have a written request from Ms. Marin to participate in today's meeting virtually for personal reasons. All those in favor of letting Ms. Marin participate virtually, please raise your hand. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. McLaughlin, and myself. That's unanimous. Ms. Marin, will you test your microphone?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Hello. And now I will turn it over to our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan, and thank you, Mr. Frisch. We're going to begin by looking at the slide presentation that is in front of you. Ms. Tolan did a wonderful job of talking about the outcomes for today, and we're going to jump right into the first one. If we can go to the next slide, please. I would like to take a moment before we do that to orient you to some resources that are available. There's a yellow folder in front of you, and that has many of the materials that we're going to be using as supports for the conversation today. The binders that we've been using throughout the process are also there if you would like to reference them at any point during this process. Next slide, please. This first consensus point of looking at the tools and the resources that the board has available to them to monitor the superintendent, we'll begin by looking at the connections between these resources, our executive expectations, and our goal reports to that superintendent evaluation. One of the resources you could reference is the beige document, which is a crosswalk between the state superintendent evaluation and some of these executive expectations and goal reports that you have available to you. You can see that these goal reports and EEs provide the board with evidence that the superintendent is working towards your expectations as a board, those strategic plan goals, and that the superintendent is working within the parameters set by the board, those executive expectations. This also provides a public and transparent accountability for the superintendent on an ongoing basis throughout the school year. On that beige crosswalk, you can see how the monitoring reports for the goals and the EEs align with the 8 evaluation standards that are currently in place to evaluate superintendents throughout the Commonwealth. As the board completes this annual evaluation each June, those monitoring reports for the EEs and the goal reports will be a way to collect information throughout the year to support the board in completing that evaluation. And individual board members will be able to reference their notes from the monitoring reports and the forms throughout the year to determine how the work has evolved and to inform your evaluation process. If we can go to the next slide, please. What we're going to do on the next 3 slides is just provide an overview of some of the work that the board has been discussing regarding the executive expectations and the goal reports and what that will look like at some of your board meetings on Thursday evenings. And then following these 3 slides, there'll be an opportunity for some consensus and discussion. The first document that we're going to look at is the Executive Expectations Monitoring Report process. And the board had the ability and went through the first round of this on September 28th when you looked at Executive Expectation number 2 that Dr. Reed presented. The blue document that you have is a simple one-pager of going over this process and explaining what steps the board will take during a regular meeting to provide the feedback following Dr. Reed's presentation. So she'll present an executive expectation. In 2 days, you'll receive a presentation on Thursday evening for executive expectation number 1. Following Dr. Reed's presentation, the board members can ask clarifying questions and comments, and then a motion will be made for one of the options that you can see either on the screen or on your blue document. Following a second and a board discussion, there's a board vote. And then the board members will, in the moment at the meeting, have the opportunity to complete the feedback form, and you can see a copy of that on the blue document. And then the board clerk will collect those feedback forms, and then all of that will be put together by the board clerk, and that's another resource that you can use as you complete your evaluation in June. We're going to take a look at also, going to the next slide, at the Executive Expectations Policy Review process. And so this process, again, which we went through on September 28th, the board looked at it for executive expectation 2, is the board's opportunity to think about the EE and are there any changes or revisions that need to be made. This ensures that at least once a year the board has the opportunity to update these expectations, but it can also be something that is made at any time throughout the year. And again, going through that process, that is laid out on that green document. Very similar, the board chair will offer the opportunity for comments and suggestions. And then one of 2 motions will be made. One is that the expectation stays in its current state, or following those comments and suggestions for revisions, it is referred to the governance manual, or excuse me, the governance committee to work on those recommended changes and bringing it back to the board at a future meeting. Following a discussion and a vote, one of those 2 steps would take place to conclude that policy review process. And then the final procedure that we want to provide an overview on this morning is the goal report monitoring process. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And very similar to the executive expectation process for Dr. Reed's presentations to the board on your purple document. And all of these one-pagers are things that could be available to you on a Thursday evening just as a support as we go through the process. This talks about what that monitoring report process will look like for the strategic plan goal reports. The first one that will be presented is goal 3, and that will be happening in November. Following a work session, Dr. Reed on a Thursday regular meeting will present a summary of that work session presentation. And then there will be the board will have the opportunity to make a motion for one of the options that you see on the screen. Following a second to that motion and a discussion and a vote, board members will have the opportunity to, again, complete that overview form to provide the feedback right there in the moment that you will then have collected by the board clerk, and will then again be another resource and reference for board members as the evaluation process is completed in June. So we've taken the opportunity to look at 3 of the procedures, provide a quick overview on those that support the board's monitoring of the superintendent performance through the executive expectations and the goal report process. And then I'll refer it to Mr. Frisch to lead the board in a discussion about this topic.
Thank you very much for that succinct presentation. I do want to direct folks' attention to the beige handout because I think it addresses some questions that people have asked about how this work connects to the state standards for the evaluation. And so this shows you where this is in your yellow folder. This shows you which goals and executive expectations align with which measures from the state. So that answers several of those questions. And then as Dustin mentioned, there are a number of handouts printed in various colors that help explain the different aspects of the process. So we can begin there and open the conversation. Anybody have any feedback they'd like to offer? Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair Frisch. I am a little perplexed a bit, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because we did talk about where we were going with policy governance versus executive limitations and strategic governance. And when I look at this, I think this requires a much more in-depth discussion rather than just a one-off, hey, everybody look, see where we've got a crosswalk. So I would hope that today we will have some of that. My other concern is regarding the process by which we are doing these executive expectations, where they are presented to us and to the public, and that night we are expected to provide comments. And then, according to some of the materials I read over the weekend, all of those comments would be used to inform the first drafting of the superintendent's evaluation, which I think there's always room for informing how we think, and I do think that it's important throughout the year to be reflective. But when I look at Thursday night's executive expectation that we are going to be discussing, that's actually the capstone expectation, because it is the crux, which I have no doubt that Dr. Reed will do exceedingly well on, being that the superintendent shall not cause, allow, or fail to take reasonable measures to prevent any practice, activity, decision, or organizational condition that is unlawful, unethical, unsafe, disrespectful, imprudent, in violation of the school board policy, endangers the division's public image or credibility, leaves the division unprepared for emergency situations, or is a conflict of interest. I believe that on Thursday night, she will make a compelling case that she is fully adherent to this. But I think the time that this should be actually done is not a one and done. It should be, those are ongoing expectations. And to have us agree to something on Thursday night to influence what happens in 6 months from now or 7 months from now seems a bit ill-timed. The second piece of it is for it to be presented to us and the public on Thursday night, and for us to immediately adopt it Thursday night, does not give time for the public to digest what's being presented and provide any insights they might have in to their individual board members for a magisterial district or at the three at-larges. So at a minimum, we shouldn't be adopting this the same night it's being presented. The second piece is I'd like to know when we are going to talk about the samples that were sent to us over the weekend, which are very detailed samples that essentially change our total approach to strategic governance. Everything from providing input to evaluations of team members to providing input or insights into particulars of a magisterial district, and about how we would interact with the regional assistant superintendents, whom up until this point have been the primary point of contact for school board members to address unique needs of individual areas. So from my perspective, I will be putting a motion on the table for us not to make any changes to the strategic governance manual until you have a new sitting board. That we actually came together with some real progress as a community, as a board, and with the superintendent. But I think going this next step and changing the whole strategic governance structure at this point is premature, with 8 of us moving off the board.
Just to address a couple things there. So the executive expectations, when we take that step, shouldn't be seen as like locking you in that moment for the rest of the year. It is a snapshot that can be informed with everything that you experience from the, yes.
I do not believe we in the past have ever had the chair directly respond to us and have a dialogue this way. So I would like to just say, if you could allow staff to answer Karen's questions.
All right, go ahead.
So in regards to, I think you had a couple different questions, Ms. Corbett Sanders. The first one with referencing the superintendent's evaluation, I think as Mr. Frisch was starting to say, that's a snapshot in time, right? So the board is looking at where she is at that point in time and using that information to inform where that current thinking is against that EE. However, as the arc of the year progresses, you may see improvements, you may see things that raise concern. So it's one data point for the board to collect as a part of the evaluation. Sure.
Ask a clarifying
Absolutely.
question on that. I'm a little confused because when you sent the samples to us, when they were posted, the samples actually state that all of these the feedback given at each meeting are going to be compiled to form the draft superintendent's evaluation. And so I'm a little confused as to, there's a difference between what the samples say, which do come out of, it looks like the Carver book of policy governance, which this board decided not to follow, and what you're saying. I mean, what you're saying, which is it's a tool for reflection for individual board members, I don't think anybody finds any harm or they actually find it as a useful tool to be having reflective pieces. But that's not what is actually in the samples provided to us.
Sure. I think, so we're trying to bifurcate that decision point. So the first decision point is just around the executive expectations and closing that out. The second piece is getting into whether or not the board wants to look at the existing language in the governance manual in relation to some of those samples and make any changes.
It's really hard to do that when you've already shown us the playbook of what the plan is. So I'm having a hard time understanding it. And I would just suggest that we, there are two things there too. The executive expectation for Thursday night, which I fully support as an executive expectation. I would actually have moved it to the end of the year because it is the capstone. Did we do all of these things? Was the system managed in a way that was ethical and did not cause any reputational or financial risk? But getting that presented on Thursday night and voting on it on Thursday night is not how we typically do any voting. We usually have things presented as new business and then 2 weeks later vote on it.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Ms. Cohen, and then Dr. Anderson.
Thanks. I guess two things. I think as just speaking for myself as one of 12, I'm really in support of this evaluation process and how we did it. I recognize potentially there may be some tweaks about the 10 minutes during a meeting kind of thing. I absolutely hear what some of my colleagues are saying, and it needs to be really clearly outlined that, to Ms. Corbett Sanders' point, that we're not married to that, especially because we will be handing it, we're in this transition period where we're going to be handing that to the next person, whoever holds our seat, which I think is a real benefit to them to walk in and get a snapshot of our perspective while we were there. But to Ms. Corbett Sanders' point, making sure that they don't feel like they're tied to that because their experience may be altogether different in their 6 months of what this year looks like. So I hear what you're saying on that. I think part of the heartburn, and I don't mean to speak for other people, is that the process of of strategic governance manual changes would typically start in the governance committee with staff bringing to governance, here's the suggested changes, then that being adopted in whole or picked apart or changed 15 times, sometimes we do that, and then come back to the board. So it's a committee of the board recommending it to the board. And so I do understand this feeling of like the optics of this are that we are just being handed changes to the one thing that we is our, presiding document. And so I definitely, absolutely understand how people are feeling that way. So but I don't want the people who come after us to be left in the middle of like a very fluid process. I'm not sure that's fair to them either. So my 2 cents would be if we could send this to governance as number 1 on its priority list and get this in a place where it could come back to the board. If during the process it comes back while we're still here, I think that's the conversation. If the process isn't done until it's new people, then that's the conversation too. But in the interim, I certainly don't mind getting the reports, but it might be helpful to us to understand the thought behind when each expectation is being presented in kind of the whole picture. If it's numerical, I don't know if that logically makes as much sense. Thanks for the grace on extra time, sorry.
Dr. Anderson?
Okay, I'm sorry. I just kind of want to start with kind of setting my expectations because I did come in a little bit later because I had to deal with something upstairs. Can you clarify, Mr. Frisch, for what is our expectation for this period? Because I want to make sure I'm coming in the right way.
Without objection, I'd be happy to.
Oh, well, I'm asking you a direct question.
Okay. The first portion here is a discussion about what was presented. So the process that leads towards the evaluation, right? The second portion is a discussion about the governance manual and how it identifies the relationship between the superintendent and the school board. Which there's a couple different versions posted. One has highlights that identifies the various elements. And then there's a red line version that takes those highlighted pieces and kind of segments them out for better clarity.
I think I was asking, is it just for us to peruse and to give feedback now, or do we have a decision at the end of this
We will
session?
also be breaking up into, the second half where we're talking about the governance manual with the superintendent, school board relations, we'll be breaking up into some smaller groups. As for the first half, we are discussing these things with an eye towards moving the ball forward and finishing this up so that we can focus on the executive expectations analysis and votes.
Okay, thank you. That is very helpful in order for me to give my feedback. I do want to say I am in very, very tight alignment with what Ms. Cohen has just shared, which is there is a sense that this does not belong to the staff to revise. This is a governance manual that is to be designed and revised by the board because we determine how we govern ourselves. So I know it feels a little bit like we're fighting for territory, but the delineations that these changes are trying to outline are being blurred. The role of the board is to not have its governance manual be revised by staff. So I would love for these suggestions to be brought back to governance and have the body of the board kind of wrestle with it and then to get it back to the full body when it's ready. Having said that, I do want to be in very, very high support of what Ms. Corbett-Sanders shared. We are months away from a new board. They might want to undo this whole entire thing. I don't think we lose anything by waiting a little bit for them to actually have their stamp on in this conversation a little bit. I see space for us to just take a greater pause there. Thirdly, I am not sure that I have clarity as to when we did make this board decision to move forward on policy governance. So that's a question that is still hanging out there for me. I don't see any issue with the executive expectations that we developed. I think, as was shared last time by Ms. McLaughlin, we did really some good work there. We wrestled with it, we got it to a very good place, and I want to receive the reports. Whether or not we change the timeline, that's, something that's for a different discussion. But I think those are very worthwhile and should very much be informing how we evaluate the superintendent, but it should not be the sole source of information by which that is done. Do I want it to be a surprise? No. I do want us to get clearer on what is it that we are looking for. I, for one, I would love to dig into some of the strategic goals that we have set, because I don't even know right now what the baseline is for us to determine whether or not adequate growth would have been made by the time we evaluate the superintendent. The document is done in June, July. So I do want to make sure that I raise that here. I also agree with Ms. Corbett-Sanders' assessment that we don't vote on things quickly. We present it and then we vote 2 weeks later. Granted, the vote that we took 2 weeks ago, that wasn't anything that was of any significance. And it was something that was already done back in July. So, but the rest of these reports will be meeting. So I would like to get that time to really be thoughtful and to really get feedback, because otherwise it's just for Cardi Anderson and not Mason District, because I'm there to represent them and they would not have had an opportunity to engage with me on this issue. So I definitely would like to support the motion, and I don't know if you put in a motion, but the idea of having the governance committee begin this work, and for us to really pivot into some of the other things that we know we still need to do. We have a policy that is outstanding. I don't know, is it 4240? I can't even remember the title. I would love for us to wrestle with that here, because I know we don't have that time. And I would like for this to go to governance, but thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. I do want to echo all of the concerns that have been raised by my colleagues here. I absolutely support this going to governance. And I do want to reiterate something that I'd said in one of our working retreats. Dr. Reed, we spent extensive amount of time on these 13 executive expectations. And as someone who has valued them being in our strategic governance manual, to me, they are a clear guidepost for you and the board. I never envisioned that your team would create 13 reports and ask me to sign off, as others have said, in a point in time. I don't know how else to say it, you all, but from my more than a decade of service, it's illogical. The bottom line is the monitoring goal reports, those are what I have watched superintendents bring. And that is from a year of assessment of how we are on the metrics, on the measures. The executive expectations are how we have clarity for the superintendent and the board of what we expect from him or her, or they, over the course of a year. And then when we do the evaluation, we have the opportunity that for us to look at the monitoring reports and then any other things that have come up that we know from a year-long relationship with our superintendent and our board relationship with the superintendent to use them to help inform. So, Dr. Reed, we often talk about how the leadership team and you all need to get to the business of operating the system. I would like to take that extra harness of work off of your team and you. I don't think you need to be presenting 13 reports. They are a snapshot in time, and therefore I don't think they're meaningful. I think they serve as a very, as I said, clear explanation for what we expect of you. And at the end of the year, we can point to where we think that wasn't accomplished. And I guess I'm out of time. So the only thing, Mr. Frisch, I'll sneak in there is, I stand by what I've said and what I thought this board was. Let's do the work and no more policy governance stuff and the Carver model stuff. That's for the next board to decide if they want to take up. But we have a perfectly good strategic governance manual that we have refined and improved on, and I don't understand how we landed here.
Ms. Pekarsky?
Okay, thank you. I agree but disagree on some points. I appreciate and I believe Dr. Reed's intention was to help us in this work because we do have limited time. But at the same time, I also agree that the optics of the board not being the one who is directing this work is a problem. So I'm in support of punting this back to the governance committee, of which I am a part, and would be willing to do more meetings to try to get it finished, because the second part of this is where I disagree. I think it's very important it gets done before the end of the year so that when the new board comes in, there is a structure upon which they can start their work. This is not a forever. This could be a flop. This could be terrible. I'm fine trying new things. Maybe others are not, but I really think it would be a gift to provide this to the new board. If it doesn't work for them, if they don't like it, there is nothing that says they have to continue or that they can't make their own decisions. They can't go forward and change this or tweak this. I just see it as something that would be helpful to them. And I think we have, as we're hearing, kind of a philosophical disagreement on that, and we'll just have to see, where the majority ends up with it. But I definitely think this needs to go back to governance to be looked at and worked on, and then tried to bring forth to the full board.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Ms. Marin.
There's clearly, I have too much 12 water bottles and too many wires over here, so it's a tripwire. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for all the work on this so far. I say I agree with my colleagues that I do think this should go to governance. I think it's a governance manual is our work, and that's where this should come out of. And I think there's so much here that we could do it pretty quickly in governance and bring back to the board. I also agree with Ms. Cohen. I understand that we want the next board to be able to sort of set their structures for themselves. However, I think setting a structure for them to walk into, to have something to work within, to see, does this even work for us, is important. I remember being a board member 6 months in saying, I'm not sure I know how to evaluate the superintendent as well as I would like, because I'm walking into 6 months of working with this and there wasn't this structure in place. And I think having, and I'm saying I would love to know what our previous board members thought in sort of conversations. Having a written, voted on structure, I think will just help the next board walking into a halfway through the fiscal year is difficult. And I know many of the other board members did it too. So I do think while there were structures in place before, having a consistent public reporting where we see what our expectations are clearly in the governance manual and we see the reporting on the expectations. I don't think even voting on them means that there's not things that will change that will come to us afterwards. I believe that's just saying, all right, we accept this report for what it is in this moment in time. I do think in terms of voting that day, my understanding is we're getting the reports 2 weeks ahead of time, which gives us time to read them and review them. If we try to hear it and vote 2 weeks later, I don't know if we'll get to all of them. So I think in terms of that structure, if we get them ahead of time, there's time to do that community engagement. So long story short, I think it would be very beneficial to the board to give them this structure to walk into, and then they can see how it works as they're getting their feet under the ground, and then see if they want to tweak it or not. But I think that's better and gives us more consistency for what happened in the first half of the year to the second half of the year.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Ms. Marin, followed by Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
Sure, thank you. And just before I start my time, can you just remind me what my time is? Because I'll set my timer to be sure that I don't go over since I can't see the timer.
2 minutes.
I'm sorry, was it 2, did you say?
Yes, 2 minutes.
Okay, hold on. Let me just get this set, please, so I can do the accurate. Just 1 second, please. Thank you. Okay. Great. Okay. So I just wanted to go over calendaring for a moment. So December 4th is the last regular meeting of this school board. So that means anything proposed for new business would need to go up by November, when is it, 20th. So as far as governance getting to work on this prior, that is going to be a major challenge. Governance was supposed to meet last week, but unfortunately it needed to be canceled because we didn't have quorum. And the priority for governance, as chair, in talking with the clerk and in communicating just a tiny bit with members, but hard to connect, the priority is to approve some longstanding no change memos that are going to need review and time to be in front of the full board. So there's just no way to be able to, for the governance to do anything in this year, even if we didn't have anything on our agenda. I think too that when I reflect back about ways that we've done monitoring or hearing work, these are the two that we have experienced on this board. One has been office given reports. So we had meetings where all of the Instructional Services Division gave a report, or finance, or facilities. And there was criticism from some on the board that it wasn't thorough enough. And there was criticism from others that they already knew some things. So that's been tried and didn't work well for the board. Another one is the goal reports, according to the past strategic plan. And my recollection is that the timing would get thrown off and the information reported was obsolete. So I am very inclined to use the process being presented because what has worked past has not met the needs of the board, because the work that's been done and is being encapsulated today and summarizes work that's been done for months of a known best model. And also, as one of the 4 people seeking to earn the election to this board, I want this in place. And I ask my colleagues to listen hard to those of us seeking to return who can see what the future is going to look like here. That could be your legacy to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Ms. Derenak Kofax, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
So there's obviously 2 different schools of thoughts here. A couple things I want to, and there's some room for compromise. So first I want to say thank you to the staff who've worked hard on this. I do appreciate that. We do appreciate what you've put out there. And Dr. Reed, I understand your desire to get clarity on some things like your evaluation. I do want to say I think this will be a great gift to the new board, the superintendent evaluation, because this is hard, because sometimes just mentally what you do is you figure out which one of the VDOE things we have to fit into. So thank you for that. With that said, I have to go with, we as a board do determine how we govern ourselves. That's what the strategic governance was. I mean, it was put in place, I think, by earlier boards when I was first running, which was 12 years ago for this board. So I would support the opportunity for this to go back to governance, which is the way this process should be done for us. I do have a question, and a couple people talked about it, but I kind of want to see my colleagues shake their heads, yes or no. And I realized there were some meetings I missed due to personal reasons. But did we make a decision as a board to move forward with policy governance? No. What's the understanding amongst my colleagues?
No, we didn't.
No, okay. Well, that's the consensus that I'm hearing. I'm not asking for a vote here, but the consensus.
But it's already in place. I couldn't raise my hand, but I just want to say it's already in place.
Let's
let Ms. Derenak Kofax have her time. Thank you.
Okay, well, she asked for input.
Thank you. So there is disagreement on that. I think we as a board, and I think going through governance to ensure that we understand, that committee understands as the governance committee where we are on this topic. I think that's first and foremost. So, and I don't have a lot of time left in my time, but I do want to say I find it a little disconcerting the way, and I mentioned this at the board table, the way we are supposed to go and look at something and have a 10-minute recess and then evaluate something that will be on the superintendent's record. Look, it sometimes takes, maybe it's just me, but it takes me hours sometimes to evaluate former and superintendents. And I get this is one markation in time, but I find it a little awkward. And so I would like that to be looked at by governance as well, unless we agree to that. And I just think that that was awkward. If it was one thing like it was last week with one thing, but a complex ideas and the way it's presented, then take a 10-minute recess. I find that awkward. So that's all I have time for.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak-Kofax. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. Omesh.
Okay, I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to say something that can possibly help. But I do think, like, there's not just two different schools of thought. There's two different narratives of where we are. And there was a presentation by the superintendent of the Carter, how the Carter board governance. Carver?
Carver.
Okay, I'm renaming your school. Anyway, and we did not adopt that because we changed it to expectations, and we also didn't follow his rules, which would have required a third party to lead us in this discussion. That's not happening. And that's been my struggle for a couple of reasons. When I first got on this board, I spent a lot of time going over the enabling statute because we are a Dillon state rule. And it says specifically what the board is responsible for. And the board is responsible for hiring the superintendent, policy, and accountability is the way to summarize it. When I receive from the superintendent's directed staff members read-written portions of my governance manual, it gives me more than heartburn. I have to say that. Because I'm not figuring out how we got there. This is also, it goes beyond heartburn, because when I look at the heart of what we're looking at, we are changing the delegated authority to the superintendent, as written by her staff, as directed by her. Ooh, that is hard for me to say. And then we have this structure in these meetings that says, sit down and fill out this form, which looks a whole lot like homework being given to the board. The structure of this, to me, with my background, and I'm sure there's others with similar background that disagree, is a little bit beyond hard to swallow. I don't know how to say to my constituents that I'm doing my job under this. And to send it to governance, which I think who are the folks on governance? Melanie? And who else? These are all the people who agree.
Policy governance.
These are the people. So,
Please don't interrupt Ms. Keys-Gamarra. She's
so
got the time.
I'm wrapping it up, but I'm telling you, with my understanding of what the state statute says, this delegated authority is being substantially addressed. When we first started out, it was, we're making a few tweaks, so it's okay. These are not a few tweaks. And I'm struggling with that because I don't know how to tell my constituents that we're doing our job as according to the state statute.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Ms. Omesh, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Yeah, so I guess several times now in picking up the strategic governance work, we're finding ourselves in a place where, folks aren't feeling like we're even on the same page about whether we're doing this, when we're doing it. So in my mind, I'm thinking back at the meeting we had in the cafeteria where there was discussion, this idea was presented. I guess there was opportunity to comment, and then we just move forward. And I'm thinking perhaps it should have been an official vote, an opportunity to, have some discussion. And I know a number of board members were not able to make that meeting. And then, to take an official vote. So maybe it makes sense to post something on Thursday that's like, are we doing this or not? Because then people can voice what their, thoughts are about that. If the majority moves forward, we move forward. At that point, at least the record is straight. Or I guess we have to post it to new business. I don't know how that works. We can figure that out. But whatever, that there's a vote in an upcoming meeting, that we're moving forward with this. In the meantime, I actually don't think the governance thing is the solution, because we're going to end up in the same place where some people still have feelings, and the governance piece doesn't reflect what everyone has to say about it, and then we're going to have the conversation right here all over again with what the governance committee comes up with. So I would rather us go somewhere today and figuring out, okay, there are some questions, concerns about components of this, right? Like some people are like, oh, should Dr. Reed be the sole, contact with staff, or like whatever the pieces are. I think it's worth actually spending some time talking about it right now. Maybe we can see where we end up at the end of today's meeting based on that conversation, because I thought last time we started in a place where we're all like, no, and we ended up in a much more constructive, healthy place in the end, I thought, where people walked away feeling we had a good discussion. So maybe we could also make the vote now. I don't know if we want to vote on this, but maybe it should be an official vote. But either way, let's start discussing our thoughts around this, and then at the end of the meeting, see where the board's at in terms of like what the next step will be. I think that might be more constructive than, we're kind of going in circles a little bit of like what we're doing and we're not actually doing anything anymore. And I'm worried that that's going to actually delay this too far for us to salvage it for the next board, which I think we all agree is a good idea. So yeah, that's my suggestion. I don't know if we can maybe get a consensus around that, or if we can, I'd love to see like who's supportive of something like that. We could start the conversation about the content we have, and then at the end of the meeting, pick up again what we do from here.
So you want to jump to the governance manual portion about the board superintendent relations, just to clarify?
Yeah, the language in here is limited. Like if you look at it, it's not that much. Let's talk about our thoughts, reactions, responses to that.
Just to clarify, that's the second portion of the discussion today. We haven't gotten there. I know people have gotten there. We haven't talked about it yet.
Right. And that's what I think I'm trying to get us to talk about it, so that we can determine the next steps later. But we're right now trying to figure out what are the next steps going to be in our process without even having a discussion about the content.
Well, I think, just to clarify, not everybody's participated yet, right?
Yeah.
And literally, when we have gotten to that point, that's the next conversation. So I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, that was the plan for today.
Right.
Is that the second half of this conversation would be about these changes. And obviously, we're going to want some clarity from the board about how to proceed after that.
Yeah, almost like if we can flip the conversation, I think it might be more productive. Like we see where we land, maybe we'll land in a place where we all have a sense of agreement. If we don't, we can determine a different next step.
At this point, everybody but two people have spoken. So we'd be flipping it before everybody's had a chance to chime in. Is that okay? Yeah. Ms. Tolan?
Yes, thank you. And I'm very happy to follow that portion of the conversation. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things based on, my understanding of the meetings that we've had to date. I did feel like after the retreat that we had a couple of times ago that we made a decision to not use the Carver model or policy governance, and that we were calling what we were doing strategic governance, which is the the wording that we've been using since then. So I think under strategic governance, we're just trying to figure out two things moving forward. One, is what we thought we would talk about in the second half of today, is this look at the governance manual. So the materials that were given to the board to take a look at included background materials if we were going in different directions. So as far as the governance manual is concerned, we were looking at today, do we want to leave the governance manual as is? Do we want to look at that red line? The red line that came from staff was by no means staff interjecting new information or different information into the governance manual. It was simply moving things into a section so it would be more transparent that these are all items around superintendent board roles. The third option was what I'm hearing people want to do today is turn this portion over to the governance committee so that they can work on it and come back to the full board on any changes that we may make to the governance manual. That's what were the options for our next part of the discussion. The other piece that we still need to, just work on is, and I'm hearing from people, we've got goal reports coming up. We have looking at the expectations. Do we want to do a form? Do we not want to do a form? Do we want to give people a longer time to fill out the form, just so that when you get to June and you're doing the evaluation of the superintendent, you have some background information to go on? I didn't understand that there was anything that said that those forms would, be the first draft of the evaluation. I view those forms as simply some background information when you get to June, and you can think back to the discussion on various expectations and various goals. So let me leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. I'll take my turn. I think one error I made in setting up the conversation today was not addressing what Ms. Omesh got to very quickly, which is what is the goal around that part of the discussion? For the most part, the conversation is kind of stuck to the first part. But Ms. Tolan's right. In terms of what we were envisioning as the second half, there's like three options. One of them, we've identified a highlighted version of the strategic governance manual that identifies all the areas that speak to the board and superintendent relationship. One of the things that could be argued is that it's not transparent if it's disparate all over the document, and that you can move those things into one place. And so that red line version of that does that. And then the third option, if we don't want to leave it how it is, and we don't want to move those items to one section of the governance manual because we want to edit it somehow, is the third option, sending it to governance or some other way. And either way, it'd be the board deciding what it wants to do. I would also note that much of the work of the board is done by the superintendent and their operational staff. There's rarely a policy that this board gets, and that is, again, one of our primary responsibilities is the creation of policy that is not first drafted by the superintendent, council, and other operational staff. I can't think of an example of a policy created from whole cloth by the school board. So I think where the responsibility for us comes in is, what do we do with what we're presented with? And that's what we did with the operational expectations, the executive expectations. That's what we're doing here. So we've got some go-backs. We also have lunch scheduled for 1 p.m. So I'd like to get a consensus of the board if we'd like to go past 1 p.m. With go-backs, or take a break from the go-backs, and because we have, most people have asked for a go-back. So if you'd like to break at 1 p.m. for lunch, and come back to go-backs, or if you'd like to go through lunch with go-backs, those are the kind of options. If you have another option, please let me know. Yes. Yeah. So obviously we started about an hour late today, and I think our goal should be to get to the community schools conversation as quickly as we can. So what I'd like to do, if people think that they need their go back because they've not said something that they want to say, then we can do that. We can also go right to the discussion of this governance manual issue and how we're going to resolve that. And hopefully we can wrap that up fairly quickly. There seems to be broad consensus around the table about what the next step should be. So if folks want to stay on schedule, I would suggest that we we do lunch at 1, we come back, and people use their time either to speak to either topic. Their go back on the discussion thus far, which many people have focused on the second aspect, or what we should be doing as a board going forward with the governance manual suggested changes. Dr. Anderson? Those were two options. Sorry. Okay, so option 1, and again, if there's another option, please speak up. Option 1, we break at 1 for lunch, and we come back for 30 minutes for people to speak to, and we can use the go-back list for people to speak to either what they wanted to say or what they want to say to moving forward on the governance manual potential changes. And option 2 is that we, I'm not sure if there's another a clear option that covers anything. We just keep working and push the community schools conversation longer. So, yeah, right. So I think we can do this if we do. So the first option, raise your hand for the first option. We do lunch now, which gets us back 5 minutes early from lunch. We participate for 30 minutes as a group on the question at hand. We try and make a decision about how to proceed, and we move directly into the community schools conversation. I see Dr. Anderson, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohn, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. McLaughlin, and myself. Opposed? Abstentions? Oh, sorry. Ms. Tolan and Ms. Marin, will you verbalize were you in favor of that? Option one, okay.
I'm in favor of option one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Keys-Gamarra, are you abstaining? Okay, so we're going to take a break now for lunch. We will be back at 1:25 sharp. Thank you. I have a couple slides really quickly just to show you the context of this portion about the governance manual and the superintendent school board relationship. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. If we can go to the next slide. I know the board has already started to have some conversation around this piece of the work. We just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to orient everyone to the materials that were provided. So just very briefly, there is language in the current strategic governance manual that gets at this notion of a board superintendent relations. And so we've got this content highlighted in the version you've got with the yellow document over it. You can see sort of starting on page 54, starting on page 54, you'll see some specific policy language that's called out, but this language is sort of sprinkled throughout the strategic governance manual. If we can go to the next slide. What we've also provided is a red line version that pulls the existing language in the strategic governance manual and organizes it all together in this version. You have within your yellow folder a document that shows you exactly where the language came from that's in the red line version, so you can see where that's pulled into in that specific area. So I know the board's interest at this point is sort of to talk through next steps. So we're going to hand that back over to Mr. Frisch and can answer any questions.
I just turned myself off. We're going to the go back list, and just to give people an idea of the order, we've got Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Marin, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and I imagine everybody else is going to want to go back as well. Okay. Ms. Keys-Gamarra. All right, so we'll start with Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. McLaughlin, then Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Chair Tolan for being very clear, colleagues, that we did not agree to move to policy governance. We agreed to stay with our strategic governance model, and that we certainly see room for improving our strategic governance manual. So I'm on board with that. I'm also on board with what Mr. Frisch and Ms. Neal just talked about, which is if we're taking only existing language and trying to bring it into, collectively into one spot within the governance manual, I'm also comfortable with that. If there's any new language that staff has brought to us related to this, that's the language I want to see, because I think consistently our goal and desire as a board is taking very seriously our stewardship responsibilities. I have valued in my tenure providing input and thoughts and feedback to the superintendent when it comes to principal hires, leadership team hires. Those are, again, I hope the board ultimately serves as an asset to the superintendent and not an annoyance. And I think we have to be really mindful that depending on how it is articulated, it can look like we're viewed as an annoyance. And so, anyway, so I guess my question would be, Mr. Frisch, to staff is, in that red line version of the superintendent board relations, what, if any, language is newly created?
Thank you for the question, Ms. McLaughlin. So the things that you're going to see that are different are the strategic plan goals have been updated, so they're labeled to our current strategic plan goals. So you'll see that in Appendix I, it takes out the words ignite goals because that was the previous strategic plan. In the monitoring superintendent performance, again, the goal titles have been changed just to be updated to our current version of the goals. The only other changes you see in the red line version are there are topical naming conventions assigned to these. So it's all been organized with existing content, but it's just been provided with headers for clarity.
Thank you. With what I saw is 18 seconds left. So Dr. Reed, can you speak to perhaps why there is this concern or interpretation that you're going to, or that it is your desire to change the way you interface with the board on principal hires, leadership team, hiring decisions, or even just how the board interacts with your leadership team?
I don't believe this language changes any of those topic areas.
Thank you very much. I think that'll be an important part of our conversation, but I think that clarity is extremely important, that the language is more administrative cleanup than any operational strategic changes.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you, and I appreciate Ms. McLaughlin's question, because that was a lot of what I was going to ask about. Is it seems like a lot of what is here we already had before. It's just either reordering it in a way to get it sort of all in the same place around superintendent relations, as well as updating it for our new strategic plan. So thank you, Megan, for those comments. In a conversation that Megan and I had, I think we talked about, it's a fair concern. I hear the concern about if we have these executive expectation reports several months before the superintendent's evaluation, are they out of date essentially, right, for the information we want to have? And so one thought that, as she and I were talking, and Megan, I don't mean to speak for you, so please correct me if I'm incorrect, but was maybe that we could have these reports, because I look at it as two purposes. One is, a data point, some information as a background for the superintendent evaluation, and two, to help have consistent yearly reporting on what our expectations are, right? And those both dual purposes can exist. So perhaps, in terms of the evaluation piece, if there's been a report, and I'm making up this number, that are 6 months or more old, right, there's a sort of just a quick update sent to the board before the evaluation. Doesn't have to be a whole full report, but just here's some of the things we've done since we had this monitoring report that is sent to the board, before the evaluation, to kind of give us an update. So then we have a more current picture as we go into the evaluation. Perhaps that's a good compromise for the concerns about the executive expectation reports being a little bit older. Also with the understanding that these yearly reports serve a dual purpose, which is a continual monitoring of the executive expectations, so we can make sure that the superintendent and her staff are following the expectations this board has set. So those are that's my 2 cents around that. That might be a good way to to maybe bridge the gap between the two concerns. And, just thank you again, Megan, for lifting up that this is mostly sort of cleanup changes around the governance manual from what we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Marin.
I don't quite remember what I was going to say, but I do agree. I'm glad Ms. McLaughlin brought that up. And I think it was Ms. Darnat Koufax who talked about having that short time in the meeting. I too was kind of like, this is weird. I don't know how this would work. And I had spoken to Dr. Reed this past regular school board meeting about it, and the reply that I received was that we would be getting these well in advance of that meeting, so it's not something that we wouldn't have time to dig into and give thought to. I guess have something prepared if you need to. depending how you like to work, I guess. So just wanted to make sure that others knew that.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Marin, followed by Dr. Anderson. Ms. Marin, we can come back to you if you're not ready. Okay, we'll come back to Ms. Marin. Dr. Anderson, followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Thank you. I'm glad that you raised this because one of the things that I know some of us are experiencing, there's lots of documents. So I want to be sure to go to the governance manual where I have things that are highlighted, or rather the red line version. Page 53, rather page 54. That's a new section. Marcy, can you confirm? 54, 55, 56, all the way to 58.
Yes, so page 54 is a new section with language that was taken from the original governance manual, page 6. Page 55 is a new section with language taken from the original governance manual, the current governance manual, page 34. Page 56 on the red line is a new section with language that was pulled from page 55 of the highlighted, the current strategic governance manual. Page 57 was existing language. Page 58 is existing language with some updated language pulled from other sections of the governance manual. Again, the current version of the governance manual.
And none of these are related to the sample board, the BSRs. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was information we were going to provide to just share with the board if you wanted to have a conversation about any additional potential revisions today.
So I would love, if at all possible, for us to go through the 5 pages that Ms. Neal just highlighted and maybe give a yea or nay so we could either move on or not move on or make those revisions. So that's 1. 2, before, I don't. Let me just kind of run through all my list and you could chair away by putting it all in your notes. The second thing I would like to put forth is the feedback document. There's a lot there. I don't think it works for all of the things that we need to do. And if we're really going to be intentional and explicit about its purpose, I don't even see that it requires a vote. Because what we're saying here, and I've heard you say that, I've heard somebody else confirm it to Karen Corbett Sanders's question, is that it is not the all, to be it all to the superintendent's evaluation. So 1, that language should exist somewhere. And 2, it will remove the need for us to vote on it. It's informational to be utilized at a later time. I'm not sure how voting on it or not voting on it is going to be impactful. So that's the second thing that I would like to consider. Now I'd like to pause and then pick up my time. That does not exist. I just noticed
right.
it's at 0.
So just to be clear, what Dr. Anderson has requested is that we take a consensus on the repositioning of current language as identified in the red line version, which has a red cover. Yes.
Just a point of clarification on that. A red line version usually shows where it's struck from and where it's moved to. This does not do that. It actually just looks like it's all new text.
Well, if you take the yellow, I'm sorry.
But so I'm a little anxious that I've been told things, but I'm now having to go to the red line text and then the highlighted text and do the cross map. That's really makes it very difficult because we've just been told that it's a red line version. It's a partial red line version. It's only new text.
Would it be possible to put up wherever it is that language came up?
Yes,
So
can
that
we,
we can look
can we
at
put
it.
up the gray document on the slide? The gray document in your packet has precisely that information. Ms. Darna Kofax.
Yes, can we speak on if you're asking for a vote, and I want to make sure, if that's what you're saying, a consensus vote, I do want to speak to the red line version.
We hadn't gotten that far yet, but that would be the intention.
Let's not do the red line vote yet.
I'm waiting for the document to go up.
And Mr. Frisch, while that's waiting, I know I ran out of seconds, but if I could just throw this on while we're in dead silence, could we make sure that the minutes really reflect where this board stands on policy governance? Because there continues to be misunderstandings. Are we doing it? Are we not doing it? What version, how are we using it to inform what we are doing? If that could just be clearly written down somewhere, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. All right, so if you turn to page 54, we have our first red line piece, moving this from, I believe, page 6 of the current version of the governance manual. The request is that we provide consensus on this. Would anybody like to speak to it? It's on, if you look, if your red version, it's on page 54 of your red version. This. So that's on the screen there. It's coming from page 6 of the current version of the, that highlights it. If you go to page 6, it's, all right, let me try and, okay, one second. Just so that we're all 100% clear, the version with the red cover has the additions in red with underlining because it's being moved. This, what document you see on the screen there tells you where that language comes from. So in this case, the stuff that you see on page 54 is coming from page 6 of the current governance manual, which is in yellow, this yellow cover here.
Mr. Frisch, I would add to, in the red line version, you can see the strike through on page 6.
Okay. So in the red version, the strike through is there. Dr. Anderson.
Yes, just two questions. One of the differences that I see is that the title is now S1. Can somebody tell me what S1 is?
We use the same naming conventions the board had selected prior to in there. So there was an S1. I think it was, the intention was superintendent board roles or relationship. There was an S1 and an S2. So we use that S naming to get to the 5 that we have in there.
And secondarily, the change, well, a language that was dropped from the original on page 6 is this manual clarifies the basis and the means for evaluating the performance of both the school system and the superintendent. Can somebody speak to why was that dropped? It just seems to be what we are aiming to do here.
So we retain that language in the red line version on page 6.
I don't see it. It's still on original page 6?
Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Okay, so you just moved a portion of it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it for this one.
Thank you. We'll do Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Derenak Kofax, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you, and I do appreciate that on page 6, you do show the deletion of the board delegates, so that language that moves to page 54, typically you should probably show where it goes. But then when I look at 54, what has been deleted from the draft, which isn't shown on this, is as long as the superintendent uses a reasonable interpretation of the board's direction, blah, 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 that whole section. And so that's when I'm talking about a red line version should show a red line version. And that whole paragraph is now missing. Similarly, on S2, where you've retitled it to unity of control, what S2 actually is accountability and evaluation of the superintendent. And yet again, lots been deleted and not shown here.
So Ms. Corbett Sanders, I think the language you're looking for is sitting on page 57 and 58. They just got bumped into later pages of the red line version.
Well, except you still don't have something that says accountability and evaluation. It just says accountability of the superintendent. And we're still missing huge portions of that. So then you get to superintendent monitoring and evaluation. And I presume that what you're trying to get to is what's on page 58 now, and it's on 55 there. You now make it as an S5, but you've added, is that where you're saying that whole section, that's all new language, the board will judge the overall success? Is that all new language? Because what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, it's,
Would you like her to answer?
yeah.
Go ahead.
So page 58, the S5 was the S2. You are correct, Ms. Corbett Sanders, in terms of the accountability sits under the red line version on page 56. The monitoring and evaluation sits on page 58. And the language that's in the red text has either been revised or pulled from additional portions of the governance manual. So the revised parts are the goals, those pieces. The remainder of the language is either from the beginning that got pulled into one of the other pages. So this notion of the superintendent is accountable to board decisions, like that first line that struck through on red. You see that in the accountability of the superintendent section. So it's pulled out separately. It's not deleted. And then the red text that follows the goals is all content that was pulled in from other portions of the strategic governance manual. And those page numbers are on the gray document.
So there is actually new text here. What was presented was that it's just a restructuring of what was there. There's actually new text that, well, yes, there is, because I can read it. And I know it's not here, which is regarding the executive expectations language. And so I do think, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but we need to be very clear that there is new text here.
The executive expectations language was adopted by the board when we updated the strategic governance manual, when the board approved the executive expectation. So that language is in the current governance manual.
Why is it redlined?
Because it was pulled from another section of the governance manual.
So I really appreciate what you're trying to do here. I think that there's lots of stuff that's been moved around, and it's not a traditional way of doing redlining, where it shows where something might have been moved to someplace else versus just deleted. And I think that as a board, I would suggest, rather than voting on each of these piece parts, that we actually have the governance manual, governance committee go through this and really make sure that until such time that all of this is verified and clarified, that we will use the existing governance manual as is. And my reasoning is because there's not only this piece, but there's another section which was put into our folders today, which has some pretty dramatic changes to the way we do governance. And as Chair Tolan said, we aren't doing this. So I'm a little confused why this was put in here. And so I appreciate it, but I'm now going to have to go through line by line and find it in this other place. And that's a little bit disconcerting.
Would you like Ms. Neal to explain why that was included in our packet?
So we wanted to give the board some resources similar to when the board did the executive expectations conversation from some other districts. This is language pulled from other districts' governance work that the same districts we looked at with our executive expectations to determine if the board wanted to consider any other revisions beyond just organizing into a new red line to group this information together.
Other districts that do policy governance.
Same districts that we looked at for executive expectations.
Okay.
No, and none of the content that's sitting in that document with the pink cover is in the red line version.
So I would ask that it be very clearly marked that this is not intended for adoption by this board. The pink, because somebody's going to pick this up and they're going to say, wow, look what they're planning on doing, and it would be misunderstood. So can we get agreement that that will be done?
Would you like the PDF updated with a stamp or like, okay.
That would be fine.
All in favor? No. We can put like a watermark on it or something.
Making sure it's
All right.
clear this is not ours.
All right, so yes, the board provides consensus. All right, so it is 10 till 2 when we were hoping to transition to a conversation about community schools. We also have a public hearing at 5:30 that we cannot start late. I would like to suggest that we take consensus of the board at this point to send these suggested, to send this piece of the work to governance to report back to the committee, to the board as a whole. And leave it at that and move on to because we are not going to have time for everybody who wants to speak or ask questions. And if we're going to be doing those when the governance committee comes back to us anyways, I think that's probably the fairest way of doing it. Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
People can't hear me, that's unheard of. Anyway, the only reason I'm raising my hand is because the comment I wanted to make, I think, goes more universally to how we move forward. So if we just send it as is, then that comment won't be taken into account, and it has to do with this form right here. So I wanted to hear what my colleagues had to say about this, but I understand the time constraints. But I do think that this might impact how the governance committee moves forward.
Can we,
Dr. Anderson. Sorry.
can we pause on the form that is supposed to be utilized on Thursday? Because I think it is interwoven with so many other things. I am not ready to use that form on Thursday because of the depth of what needs to happen. Plus, the use of the form also assumes other agreements. So I would suggest that we pause the form until we could really speak about it, revise it if necessary, or even utilize if we're going to use it at all. But if we could pause for this Thursday, that would be great.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Honestly, I respect the thought that, we're still working on and tweaking it, but I don't see what the harm in is having as an option available, and if people don't want to do it, they don't have to do it, but.
But that's why I had my hand up.
Well,
That
okay, let
was
me
the
finish.
conversation I wanted to have.
So I don't think there's any reason why we've, as a board, agreed to a strategic governance model with executive expectations. We added language last time we voted on in the public meeting to add that language to the governance manual around the continuous monitoring and the report. So I don't see what the harm is in having that available for board members who want to fill it out and want to practice this strategic governance model with executive expectations that we passed as a board and added to our governance manual last time. And I actually personally think that as the more we do it, the more we figure out what maybe want to tweak on these forms or don't want to tweak on these forms. So I would respectfully say, let's go ahead and have the forms, and if people want to fill them out, that's fine.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
The reason I'm raising this concern is that I think fundamentally it changes how we look at the evaluation down the road. So to continue to use it without that discussion, to me, is concerning, because we've never been able to talk about what this means. And I think that it changes some things that are so fundamental that I do think there is harm in just letting people use it if they want to, because there's still the question of how it's being used in the evaluation, in the ultimate evaluation process.
Thank
And
you.
we've never answered that.
First, we're going to take a consensus on sending this portion of the governance manual edits or suggested edits to the governance committee. All those in favor of sending this portion, we'll return to that question in a second, this portion of the work to the governance committee for consideration and expeditious reporting back to the full board. All of those in favor, raise your hand. Dr. Anderson, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Tolan, all those against, Please raise your hand. All those abstaining, with Ms. Marin away from the table. All right, so that's being sent back. As to the question of whether the form will be used or not, I think, yes, Ms. McLaughlin.
I had my placard to speak to it if I could.
Let's get to the question at hand first so that we're not doing it and then doing another round of speakers, okay? So I'm going to suggest that we're doing consensus, right? This is not a motion. So I will, when we get through the comments from board members, the question will be, do you want to send this type of the work to the governance committee? Or do you want to continue using the form in the interim? All right? All right. Ms. Derenak-Kofax and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. At this point, I think there is a great deal of divergence on the usefulness and the comfortable, if you're comfortable with it or not. Ms. Pekarsky spoke to it, I spoke to it. I think right now, I think the form should not be used by whomever wants to, because if it ends up being something that the superintendent is formally evaluated on and only 2 or 3 people use it, that's not an accurate assessment of what's being presented to the board and what is being voted on. So at this point, I would like to say that should go to the governance, that portion, which will be looked at. It doesn't say, but on page 58, it does talk about the board vote. And at this point, since many of us don't feel that that's what we're ready to do yet, we push that to the governance manual as well and continue having conversations amongst ourselves to see whether or not this is something we're comfortable with. But I don't think we should start that this Thursday at all.
Ms. McLaughlin?
So this is why I do support sending the form as another part of the governance review, because we're not real clear on what the form will be or not be and how it'll be used. However, I have sort of a slightly different thought, which is we've been told the form is just to help board members have contemporaneous notes and be able to reference it at the year end. So in my mind, if that is, as it's been presented, the case, then it's just a form for people to take their own notes. And so, Dr. Reed, I think this is probably really important for you to weigh in, because this does relate to your evaluation. If board members want to voluntarily use the form because it's great to structure their note-taking on this EE for your year-end evaluation, there's no harm there. If it's that it's being collected by the clerk and is going to be used as a draft on where the board saw you're meeting the executive expectations, I would think that would be problematic, as Ms. Derenak-Kofax mentioned, because you only have 3 people in there, and that's not official either. So I perfectly supportive, as Ms. Seisner-Heiser said, voluntarily, if you want to use the form, collect your thoughts, because in the end, it is the year-end evaluation that each one of us fills out. And as we were told, it's to support board member efforts to review, not to dictate what the board as a body is saying about the superintendent on that executive expectation in that point of time. So I know this just all sounds very confusing, but the bottom line is I think using the form voluntarily for people to use as their own notes and to keep it as such, or they want the clerk to hold on to it just for their file, for them to use on their evaluation. But otherwise, I don't recommend if it's going into official documentation. I don't think that's fair to Dr. Reed. And it also doesn't reflect then the full board, which is what we want it to be. Mr. Frisch, can you comment personally as the standing in chair? Did what I outlined make sense?
I understood what you said. All right. Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Cohen, followed by Ms. Tolan.
So I think we should send the whole kit and caboodle to governance, to use a technical term. And the reason I believe it's so important is twofold. One is, we talk about the executive expectations. At a regular board meeting, the board will vote on each of the monitoring reports presented by the superintendent. Finds the superintendent is not in compliance with one of the executive expectations, they'll present a corrective plan to the board at a subsequent meeting. The board will review each expectation annually at the time the monitoring report is presented for any revision. So it's a one and done as it's currently drafted. And I think that this whole process needs to be really discussed within governance and kind of noodle through it. Similarly, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this meeting, I do not feel comfortable with an executive expectation being presented to the board and then the board voting that night. And so I would hope that that would be part of the discussion in governance, because there's an expectation of transparency that really is important for the community. And the community doesn't necessarily go on board docs, but they may be watching. And so I believe that we should just kind of have as new business the presentation and then the adoption 2 weeks later, but that would be something governance would have to noodle through.
Ms. Cohen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question, though, is that the framework kind of that either we set up or has been set up, I imagine we could argue about that, relies on some sort of check throughout the process. So if that's the case and we have not quite figured out what that looks like, my only concern is putting Dr. Reed and staff through the motions of doing these EE reports then with not a structure of like how they're going to be utilized. So I guess that would be my question. And I don't know, Dr. Reed, if you feel like waiting in here, but if we're not getting anywhere here, does it make sense then to pause the delivery of those reports until we figured out the structure with which they'll be dealt with?
It's certainly an option. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I put this to my colleagues as much as anybody else. If we don't have a structure of what we're doing with those reports, do we just take them in as we have goal reports in the past, but normally we have work sessions on goal reports. So is a little, and I don't know in terms of timing, I put to you and Elaine, it's going to make your lives an awful lot harder of then having to group multiple EEs on the same night. But I feel like that's what we're setting.
It doesn't make, sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
It doesn't make our lives more difficult. It makes the entire board's life more difficult. The number of times we've been asked, why did a meeting go so long? This would be another thing that extends a meeting.
So I'm not sure how to, yeah.
I do think that, to your question about pausing, I really just don't think we can pause the work of this division right now. I feel like we've put a calendar together to look at the departmental functions that form the pillars to the strategic plan, and we must execute that work. And part of executing that work is receiving formative feedback in real time, not on everything at once, but on segments and chunks of this that are actionable by staff and reviewable by senior leadership and translatable for our principals and our staff in all of our departments across this division. So I think we've talked a lot about a system of schools or a school system. We need a backbone for a school system. And it has been in existence in this governance manual. Coming into the division, it's not something we've been using in the last couple of years. And I think there's some processes that have frayed as a result of not looking at these departments closely or these functions closely and supporting them in ways that will enable us to reach the goals of this division. So I think that's my feedback at this time to the question that you're posed at this time, Ms. Cohen.
Yeah, I guess just then for me as one board member, I mean, I feel like whether I understand the question about are we going to vote for it or we not, I don't know the answer to that, but I feel like if we can't document some sort of feedback, I think that's probably not super helpful to staff and to Dr. Reed. So just, I don't know how you want to handle this, but for me, I would propose that we still fill these things out. And if people, don't want to, they don't have to, but there's no way to get that continuous feedback, especially since we're not doing these as work sessions. So I'm not sure how to, so maybe we take a vote on if we want to keep doing those or not. I don't know.
To be clear, the vote is that we either don't use them for now and send the process to governance, or we do use them for now and send the process to governance. So that's the choice that you speak to, that
So
everybody
I'm
else
in the
is.
camp of use them.
I will also point out that we are, again, over time, it is 7 after, and we've got 4 people that want to speak. So Ms. Keys-Gamarra, you're next, followed by Dr. Anderson.
So I fully agree we want to move the system forward. And I have been here when we receive those goal reports. And even if you're sitting at the table, everybody gives their comments, et cetera, and you get a consensus of where the board is. And typically that has been direction for the superintendent when we have done those goal reports in the past. My ultimate objection to this is that it is essentially a pass-fail structure, right? Either you're complying or you're not complying, essentially. And it creates a dichotomy or a conflict when you have to get to that evaluation at the end, because that's a whole different rating scale. So that's fundamentally why I'm objecting. One, I don't think 10 minutes is enough. Handed me a piece of paper, okay. Feels a little bit like homework, but it really doesn't. This isn't going to, if I were, based on how I've done my evaluations in the past, this wouldn't guide me other than to remind me what I thought at that particular time. But what I normally do in my evaluation process is there are things that have happened throughout the year that I remember or I have notes of, and that's what I'm commenting on for the scale that the state has given us. I'm having problems with how this reconciles with what the state has given us. And so that's a big part of my objection to this. If people want to just give it to her and say that's what you want to do, you can do that. I won't be one of those people because I think this is a little bit disingenuous. I also think that it can mislead those people that are coming on the board to think, oh, to have to work to put that in the context of where that person was, right? And so I hear you. I want to give the superintendent feedback. I don't agree with this. I don't think that this is that full process that is really going to give her what she needs or our staff to move forward. So, I do support making it part of how we move forward so we can make sure that feedback is healthy. But the discussion at the board table has always been feedback. I'm not sure why that doesn't work here. So that's my concern.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Dr. Anderson, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Ms. Tolan.
I'll be super brief because I think Ms. Keys-Gamarra pretty much captured some of my statements. Because we give feedback at all times. We're giving feedback now. Maybe capturing that feedback needs to be better. Well, it's recorded, so it's captured, because that's what we'll do in those meetings. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater per se, because I think we can get some real good information from those reports. And I understand the urgency that the superintendent has shared, which is this is helpful in terms of a formative. So I do not want to not have those reports. I just don't think the form is our only means of providing such feedback. And until we clarify their purpose, their content and structure, I don't think we should be using them. However, if anybody else wants to use whatever we have right now, they can use it. But we also have to be mindful of what does that mean? It's just notes for them in this given period. It's not something to be moving forward because it may just be a couple of people. I, for one, won't be using it this Thursday.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Ms. Tolan.
I think it's interesting we're in this space where the conversation is about whether we want to use a form or not use a form to give feedback. I know we've had many conversations in our retreats about goal setting with the superintendent, providing continuous feedback to the superintendent so she can make sure she's on the right track. And if she's not, she can course correct in real time. I personally think, I hear what everybody's saying in terms of there's other feedback we give, and certainly we do. We make comments at the board table, we make comments in work sessions. We're constantly giving feedback on things staff are bringing us. That doesn't stop any of those processes from happening. But I do think there's a lot of value in giving and having our consistent executive expectations, which we've set, and giving consistent feedback to the superintendent of, yes, you are on track, or no, you are not on track. It doesn't mean that she may not come off track in the next few months or stay on track. But I think that feedback, as an employee, I have a boss who gives me feedback. This is a project we're having you do, and yes, you're on track to get it done, and this is, or no, you're not, and then I can course correct in real time. I think that's just, in some ways, best HR practices to do for an employee, and I think especially for a superintendent, it's very public, it's very transparent in terms of the report she gives us, in terms of our comments, and it helps, especially in this year as we're transitioning to 8 new board members, for them to have the written document of here's where the previous board members thought we were at in the first 6 months of the year before we have to evaluate them. It doesn't mean that they're very intelligent individuals. They will come in and review things and go through their own meetings and come to their own conclusion. But I think it's a helpful thing to have documented. And I don't know why we're, I guess, struggling with whether to use a form or not in addition to all the other things that we say.
Thank you. Ms. Tolan?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I won't repeat what she said. I agree 100% with her sentiments. We have worked for months and months putting together strategic plan goals and executive expectations. And so what we're just talking about now is how do we make sure that those are actually being met over this time frame? I do want to remind the board as well that in June, I believe, we were given a draft calendar of when we would look at each executive expectation and when we would look at each goal. The calendar taking us from the beginning of this school year through the end of the school year. So that, this board would see some of the expectations and some of the goals, and the next board would do that. We do not have the luxury of just halting this work and not moving forward with these because it's not going to fit in the calendar. So I think on Thursday night, we are going to have an executive expectation presented to us and Dr. Reed's view of whether she's meeting that or not. I, for one, will be taking very good notes. I will take it on that form. The Dreamsville seat will be held by someone else in the next, after January 1. And I want that person to have as much background information as possible as they move forward. When we get to June, the superintendent evaluation is an enormous task. And any background information, notes, et cetera, that could feed into that would be extremely helpful. I do not see this as prescribing it, as being a first draft for it. These are just point in time pieces of information that board members can reflect upon. As far as the EEs, Ms. McLaughlin, you talked about it earlier. The EEs are, in my mind, they're less heavy than a goal. For a goal, we're going to have a work session and a discussion at a board meeting. For each of the EEs, we will just be having a discussion at a meeting on a variety of topics that are very, very important to the school district. So, whether we want to vote on it or not, I guess we need to decide whether we're going to fill out the form or not. We can leave to individuals and collect them and make a decision in the governance committee later. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Ms. Marin?
Sure, thank you. I also appreciate Ms. Tolan. Thank you for reminding us about the timeline, since June. I know we've all spent a lot of, our time and staff time trying to have really thoughtful discussions. I don't feel that it is going to hamper my ability to do the job. I think it's really going to help with transparency, and I don't see losing ground. I am concerned that if we are to pause this work, we've had multiple days of retreats and massive amount of work. What do we say to the public that we've been spending all this time and resources and we're trying to be as transparent as we've ever been, and yet we're not going to do this. So I think we should have, trust in the future colleagues that they'll be able to take this forward. The last board left us a really good start, and unfortunately COVID derailed it. But, I feel like we've done this hard work and we don't have the answers, and we're not going to have the answers, and governance isn't able to facilitate that discussion in a timely manner. I think we make sure that we encourage the new board to watch this session, watch these sessions, and we do some great orientation. And Mr. Frisch and Ms. Tolan put together that survey. So, I think it really is our duty to move forward and continue to, to trust that we will do this work transparently and keep improving it. So I hope that we can move forward.
All right, before we take a go back, I want to take my turn. And I appreciate everybody's conversation today. I think the one thing that's clear is that we're going to be having a conversation about what this process ends up looking like. The question is whether or not we're going to allow the form to be used at the meeting, as basically repeating the process that we went through the previous week. Ms. Derenak Koufax.
I believe that Dr. Reed should continue with what she was going to do this Thursday. I do not think whether and wherever or whatever we want to do with the form should impact that, because we should not stop the work of this board and the system over this issue.
Thank you.
Just wanted to be clear about that.
All right, now we're going to take the consensus of the board. Your first option will be removing the form from the process when we do the executive expectations while governance deals with it. Your second option is to continue as planned with the form being part of the process as governance deals with it. So the first option is to remove the form from the process while governance works on it. And your second option is to keep things as it was last time with the form being part of the process as governance works on it. Is everybody clear? All right. So if you would like to remove the form as part of the process while governance works on it, please raise your hand. Dr. Anderson, Ms. Derenak Koufax. I literally said it 3 times. Yes. All right. I'm gonna do it one more time.
I got it. No, I got it.
Okay. So I need hands back up for this one. I need hands back up. I need hands back up. Thank you. Dr. Anderson, Ms. Corbett Sanders, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and Ms. McLaughlin. What did I say? You get 2 votes. Okay. And for keeping the process current while governance, or as is, as governance works on this, please raise your hand. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Marin, Ms. Tolan, and myself. So we will keep the process as is while governance works on it. What? No, she didn't. All right. Moving on, let's go ahead and take 2 minutes to transition to the community schools. And I believe that's being held run by Dr. Anderson and Ms. McLaughlin. I'm going to get out of the seat.
All right, folks, we have only until 4:30, so we should go ahead and aim to start in 1 minute. So if you could please finish up your conversations and join us at the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need one more to take a seat. I hope they're not going to the restroom. They're not. All righty, we are very excited to present to you this afternoon the Community Schools Update. And there is a portion where there is a decision to be made by the board. And I will defer now to the SCIP founder to kind of walk us through this. I know this is one of her last opportunities to have these very important discussions. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. McLaughlin to set the stage for today and to welcome our guests.
Good afternoon. Just quick correction to the record. I'm just one of the original founding members on SCIP. There was about 25 of us. Now, that actually was Ms. Strauss who started, yep. But the longevity was with my colleague, Ms. Darnat Kofax, for many, many years. What I want to do right now is just help everybody understand. First of all, we have members of the county as well as FCPS staff with us here to walk us through the community schools where we are. And to refresh everybody's memory, you may recall that the Board of Supervisors recognized that because the schools are our property and buildings and responsibilities, that they deferred 2 key decision points for them not to take action until we first looked at it and gave direction to the superintendent. And that has to do with the framework for how we develop community schools here in Fairfax County in partnership with the county government. And number 2, the site selection process. Because for those who are familiar with the existing community schools here in Fairfax County, those 3 were pilots. The funding was brought by outside organizations that asked us to pilot, and they would provide the funding. And we're really, board members, I hope you understand, this is so important today that we no longer delay this. This has been sitting for probably up to 18 months, where the SCIP and the Board of Supervisors have been waiting on us. So I want to turn it over now to Dr. Presidio, who has done a phenomenal job under our direction from the board on getting more information to us. If you can then introduce our amazing guests from the county government as well, along with FCPS staff who've worked really hard on this, including Saray, then walk us through that, and then board members will go to discussion and decision point in the conclusion. And again, we're looking to try and do this within a 2-hour time frame. Thank you, Dr. Presidio.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. McLaughlin. So we're very excited to have the opportunity to talk about the community schools work with the board and with the public today. I think Ms. McLaughlin did a really good job talking a little bit about the history, but just a few things to add. First of all, I would just say, again, this, of course, is one of the strategic initiatives of SCIP, the Successful Child and Youth Policy Team. And it's a joint initiative, again, with the county and FCPS. So we're really excited to have our county partners here with us today. First, we have Chris Leonard, the Deputy County Executive, and Marla Zemetsky, who's from Neighborhood and Community Services. We work very, very closely with them on this initiative. We also have Saray Smalls, who's with us. She's in our DSS department, technically responsible for health services, but this is other duties as assigned. And she's done a fantastic job leading and guiding this initiative with the help and support from Susan Wagner from ISD. And Saray's going to lead most of the presentation today, but there's just a little bit of background and context that I wanted to provide before we get started. The presentation outcomes, again, as Ms. McLaughlin said, 2 big things. One, we want to share the findings from the program evaluation that we did back in back in 2022, started in the summer of 2022 and was completed in December of 2022. We have shared that with the board. but we've not had an opportunity. We've only shared it in writing. We've not had an opportunity to discuss it. So this is our first opportunity to do that with you and with the public today. Secondly, and probably more importantly, is to use that evaluation to look at the updated recommendations that we have for the board today. Again, primarily related to roles and responsibilities of the county, of the school system, and our partnership with community organizations in the site selection process. And as Ms. McLaughlin mentioned, our goal today, what we're really asking the board, is for consensus on the program model or the framework for community schools, if you will, so that we can move forward with this initiative. And the next step in this initiative would be able to basically take this presentation to the Board of Supervisors. Once they endorse it, then we can start looking for additional funding opportunities to, one, bolster the 3 community schools that we do have, and secondly, hopefully be able to expand down the line to other sites. So that's what we're looking at trying to accomplish today, and we're going to try to do all this in 30 minutes or less. Just to start out with, to ground everybody in what a community school is, a definition or what we mean when we say community schools, we're really talking about a holistic approach to education that looks at supports for students academically, socially, emotionally, and looks at support for their health needs and services as well. And we've got 4 pillars, much like our strategic plan that we look at when we talk about community schools. The first is that we want all of these supports to be integrated. We don't want students to feel disjointed in the sense that they're getting academic services here, they're getting social services here. We really want an integrated approach. It's also very important that we're providing, additive supports and resources, so extended learning time for students dealing with academic issues, or opportunities for students to get enrichment experiences that they might not be able to get financially otherwise if we didn't provide them at their site. And then the role of family and community partnerships is incredibly important, not just in the service delivery, but also in the leadership of the program. We really want to empower families to have a strong voice in defining and determining what services families and students need in the school, and making sure that those services are what we're actually focusing on in our work in community schools. A few milestones to add to what Ms. McLaughlin kind of mentioned in terms of the timeline, just real quickly looking back. We've actually been at this work for over 5 years now. This work started with an exploratory committee of administrators and FCPS and county officials back in 2017. In 2018, we had some opportunities for some community funders that came forward and offered to invest in these initiatives, the United Way, along with some additional funding that we received from the county. We were able to open 2 sites at Mount Vernon Woods and Whitman. And then the following year, we had an opportunity with some additional community funders, the Community and Schools CBO, who had an opportunity to expand community schools to Glasgow Middle School. In February of that year, we really did a lot of work again in partnership with the county and the school staff to really try to articulate our framework and our model. And we were doing pretty well, and we were about to get some momentum and bring that forward to the board for discussion. But of course, COVID hit, and we didn't do anything for almost 2 years really on moving this particular initiative forward. So in February of 2022, we had our last discussion as a board on this topic. And at that time, the board had a number of questions that you wanted us to bring back some additional information, which we'll talk about that a little bit more today. But primarily, the discussion in February asked for us to do a program evaluation. And we did a very comprehensive program evaluation that looked at pulling in quantitative data, qualitative data, looking at student test scores, for example, looking at student attendance rates, grades. But we also collected a lot of qualitative information in surveys and site interviews with the site coordinators, with teachers, administrators, students and parents in the community schools to really get their impression of what was working and really maybe what could be improved or what might be missing from the initiative. And Saray led that entire process, again, in partnership with the county, and did a fantastic job with that. And we're going to be presenting those findings today. What I want to really stress, though, is that that report that was issued in 2022 has continued to evolve, right? We published that in December of 2022, but we've continued to do work on the skipped to think about how we can even refine our framework. So the presentation that you're going to get today are the most up-to-date recommendations we have about what should be included in our model. Again, particularly as it pertains to the types of services, the management and oversight, and the partnerships between the county, the school staff, and the community organizations, as well as the site selection process. Yes, this document is posted. There's a number of documents there, so you might have to work your way through them. and maybe we can help you with that in just a second. So I mentioned that project methodology again, so I won't belabor that point in the interest of time, and I'm not going to go through all of the milestones on the project timeline, but you can see there have been a lot of different decision points and a lot of work that's happened on this initiative over the last several years. So we're very excited to share the findings, the recommendations with you today, and again, please keep in the back of your mind, our goal would be to reach consensus on this framework today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Saray to walk us through the findings and the recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio, and good afternoon, everyone. In this section of the presentation, we're going to be reviewing the 6 evaluation methods and the associated key findings for this project report. First, we're going to start with our family survey. So, of course, given the Community Schools Initiative, we thought it important to evaluate our families. I'm really here trying to determine the knowledge of and involvement with the community schools programs and services offered across those school sites. Here, we had the opportunity to survey 3,013 families. Those surveys were distributed to the students' enrolling parents across those sites. We had a response rate of 22%. Overall, we found that parents are satisfied with the community school. We also found that parents agree that this Community Schools Initiative is helping their student feel connected to the school, helping them feel connected to the school. However, we did note that knowledge of the specific community school programs and involvement with the various programs were low. Next, we're moving to our staff survey. So this survey was utilized to determine our school staff perceptions of the Community School Initiative at their school site. 80 electronic surveys were distributed to identified staff. Of those, we had a response rate of 61.3%. Here, staff noted that community schools are helping families meet their basic needs. They also agreed that community schools are essential for providing support for both physical, social, and emotional well-being, but they did note some less than favorable impacts towards increased attendance, increased student engagement in learning, and improved student behavioral issues. Our staff are perceiving they're not really seeing changes in those areas. They also offered less than favorable responses regarding the engagement with central office on this initiative, noting the need for more training, clearer expectations, and ongoing communication. Our staff are wanting to know how best to support this initiative at their school site. Next, we have our site-level survey. This survey was utilized to determine how the community school program operates at each school site. There was one survey distributed to each site to be completed by the administrator and the school site coordinator. This particular survey was developed in 2 parts. Part 1 was a survey only, asking questions regarding meetings, asking questions regarding case management processes. We had 67%, or 2 of our schools completed that survey. And then part 2 of this site-level survey included a review of programs and services, wherein each school site was able to identify the programs and services offered in the 21-22 school year, and all of our schools participated in that. In this particular survey, we found that the programs and services reported were primarily reflective of Tier 1 supports. We also found that there was another need listed here for more central office coordination on this particular front. Next, we rolled into structured interviews with our FCPS administrators. We wanted to get a better understanding of their perceptions of the Community Schools Initiative. The structured interviews include our principals, regional assistant superintendents, and magisterial board members connected to each of the schools that are currently active as community schools. We participated in 1-hour interviews via Zoom, and we did have a 100% response rate there. Here, we're finding that our administrators are requesting a need for improved communication, including the successes and challenges to increase engagement and participation in the initiative. Next, we had the opportunity to conduct informational interviews. Here, we really wanted to see what are other divisions doing as it relates to community schools. We did provide outreach to 12 school divisions, wherein we received response from 6, 4 via an interview via Zoom, and 2 response via email. Our intention with completing these informational interviews specifically related to their site selection process. How are they determining which schools are becoming performing community schools in their division, and what is their staffing model. Our findings here, our school divisions are utilizing a variety of clearly defined metrics for their site selection process. Some of those metrics are connected to academic performance, some are connected to socioeconomic status, but they are in fact clearly defined. Also, we found that the majority of the school divisions that we made contact with are employing their school site coordinator via a community-based organization, which is our current model here in FCPS. We did kind of probe a little bit further to note what were the advantages and disadvantages of this staffing model. Advantages being our CBOs have extensive networks and understanding of the community needs. That's one of the responses those other school divisions noted. The disadvantage here is that that staffing model does rely extensively on continued funding by the CBO to support that position. And then we also found them noting that sometimes staff in those positions may lack connection to the centrally provided resources offered by the school division. And then lastly here, as far as an evaluation method, our school level data review. We wanted to look to determine any long-term impact of this community school initiative in improving student successes at each school site from 2017 to 2022. The school level metrics that we considered are listed here. We looked into our SOL pass rates, both for reading and math, chronic absenteeism, assets and protective factors as identified through the Fairfax County Youth Survey. And then we also took a peek into some other data sources that we had access to, including discipline incidences, immunization noncompliance. We also looked at the SEL screener and our family engagement survey. Overall, our finding here is that our initiative is still relatively new and has been inconsistently implemented. I think Dr. Presidio noted that with the impacts of COVID, but then also thinking about the time needed to rev up new programs. So our data has shown inconclusive to any impact of the community schools initiative at that time. Next, we want to roll into our proposed recommendations. As Dr. Presidio noted, these have been updated from the November 22 evaluation report shared with the board, partly due to continued collaboration and the need for continuous improvement. There are two key recommendations that we have that we will roll through. One is related to our Fairfax County Community Schools model. Here we have our defined roles and responsibilities for each organization that facilitates the Community Schools Initiative, including FCPS, our county partners, and a lead CBO to be defined for each school site. For FCPS, too, that I want to bring attention to is really the direct collaboration with the county on all aspects of the Community Schools program. That will be significant in this path forward. The other I want to call attention to is administration of the program. That would be a change from our current model, ensuring that we are managing our support staff, we have assessment and evaluation of the program that's standardized, and then also the management of both internal and external communications, which we'll discuss a little bit more in the upcoming slides. For our county partners,
I'm sorry, Saray, for interrupting really quickly, but I'm looking at this slide, and at the very bottom where it says the lead CBO, community-based organization, that's never been my understanding that they're going to continue to be part of this framework. So
that is an update.
Can you provide some clarity?
Absolutely. So that is an update that we provided from the report that was distributed in December of last year. I think one of the changes we made is there was a bit of removal of the CBO in that report. We want to re-engage the CBO, not from a management of the site coordinator perspective, but more so from, as listed here in the slide, the service coordination and outreach. We note that our CBOs have really strong roots and connection to an understanding of the needs of our community, and we don't want to lose that. So we think it would be a great opportunity to have them continue to partner with our schools, but not in the process of employing the school site coordinator. Dr. Presidio, did you have anything you want to say?
I mean, I think that was a good explanation.
I wanted to make that clarification because I think the model you've got up there is creating some confusion for several of us on the board who are mindful of what the pilot model was, and this is kind of looking like the pilot model. So the distinction is really important, that maybe part of it is that orange block that says lead CBO should be a lot smaller because their role is not for, 3 equal parts. And
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. I mean, we definitely could work on a different infographic for that. I mean, I think for the purpose of the discussion in terms of the roles and responsibilities, I would ask folks to look at the bullets on the left-hand side, which really try to explain the roles that those different organizations are going to have in this process. And as Saray said, this is very different than what we're doing now. What we're doing now is the CBO basically is in charge of the entire Community Schools Initiative. And it looks different at different schools because we're working with different CBOs, and we haven't had a model or a framework that really articulates the expectations of what students and families would receive in terms of services. This fixes that, and this addresses that, and it removes the CBO from that kind of level of authority. But what it does is it says we still need to partner with the CBO because they're bringing a lot of supports and resources to the table, and we don't want to lose those. But we need the CBO to work within our larger FCPS framework, and we need to have control at the FCPS level as well as the county level for managing and supervising this initiative.
yeah, I'm listening to board members sidebarring, and I will say that this is creating a lot of confusion, even when you talk about the bullets, the top one, administration of program, managing a support staff. I mean, almost every bullet up there, it just keeps referencing these CBOs, which makes it sound like we're just staying with the pilot model we've had, which has been a concern. So
It's very, very different,
yeah,
and I just
yeah.
want to be really clear that this model is very different than what we're doing now. So maybe in our discussion, if there's further questions, we certainly can dig into that a
Yeah,
little bit deeper.
I totally appreciate that, and I hope board members know this is not my typical way of interjecting as someone managing the meeting, but seeing the reactivity around the table, including my own understanding of a lot of our pre-meeting conversations, this slide, I think, is presenting some challenges. So we'll let you finish the presentation, but I want to tee up for you that there's going to need to be a lot more clarity about who we are hiring, who we are managing, and where the CBO's role is in this.
No, I appreciate kind of the foreshadowing on that, and I think some of the slides that we're going to get to here in just a second will help with that a little bit as well.
So I do want to move on to the next slide where we're going to be really honing in on the FCPS roles and responsibilities and some of those changed recommendations. One related to our program support staff. One of the recommendations we have here is to identify a central office coordinator, partly due to the need to enhance coordination and management of all of our community schools across the initiative. So that person should be employed centrally by FCPS. Our hope here is that this individual will have the opportunity to develop standardized implementation plans for this initiative. I think we're missing the standardization across our sites at this time. We also want to ensure that we're maintaining standard policy, maintaining our memorandum of understanding, also standardized training curriculum, both for those site coordinators and for the staff associated with the Community Schools Initiative per that staff survey that we facilitated. Professional development opportunities for those individuals. And then also that individual really help with the ongoing networking among community school principals, site coordinators, regional assistant superintendents that are connected to the school sites identified to serve as community schools. Our second piece here is that school site specialist. We updated the name a little bit to align with that of our FCPS positions. We do believe that this person should be employed by FCPS, so that is a change from our current model, partly due to the need for efficient hiring and job descriptions, qualifications. They'll also be connected to our FCPS compensation plan. We do want to engage them in essential onboarding functions. They'll have access to student level data. And that last bullet is really salient for me, is that shared common processes and outcomes aligned with our FCPS strategic plan and supporting collaboration with supervisors and colleagues. Next, in thinking about assessment and evaluation, we need standardized processes on these things. Because our 3 schools are under 3 different models, there's no standardization. So as the program managers for this initiative, a change there is having FCPS manage, we would allow for standardization of assessment those needs assessments being utilized to determine our action plans, what is to be done at that school site each year, and then also the utilization of quarterly reports and end-of-year evaluations. We've noted from our RAS, from members of this board, the need for more information regarding what's going on with community schools. So we hope that this particular recommendation will support that. Also communications. A big piece here is both internal and external. Internal to our staff, internal to this board, and external to our partners, as well as our families as to what is going on with community schools, the initiative at the school site, where our successes, and where there may be some challenges and room for opportunity, for growth. The note here on our lead CBO, I think the board had noted some changes. We want to continue to identify a lead CBO for each school site that's identified for the Community Schools Initiative, partly due to we want to ensure that we're centering family voice and enhancing our outreach efforts. Here we're looking at enhancing the outreach to underrepresented neighborhoods and populations within the school community. We're also giving consideration to bolstering family and community collaboration with our school site specialists and other key staff. So where the CBO may not continue to manage the program, we do think there is benefit to continue to collaborate with them. In this next section, we're going to be touching on our site prioritization process. This process involves the utilization of clearly defined metrics from available data sources and should be completed annually across all school sites to determine prioritization. This process should occur prior to selection and is a 5-step process. Step 1 being identifying our primary measures listed here. Step 2, identifying our secondary measures also listed on this slide. In an effort to move forward, I do want to get to step 3. Once we've identified all of the measures listed for step 1 and step 2, we want to identify the list of 25 schools that have the greatest calculation of those measures. From there, we want to consult with our regional, our school administrators, our regional assistant superintendents, and this board to say that here are the 25 schools based on these metrics, and we want to ensure that folks are aware of the expansion prior to the expansion, really to garner support for the initiative. Our thinking here is to determine readiness for the initiative. Are these school sites ready? Does the school feel like they're ready for this initiative prior to implementation? From there, given those considerations, garnered feedback from the board and those administrators, FCPS and the county would then finalize the site selection prioritization. At that point, site selection is really dependent on 2 pieces. 1, the identification of available funding, and 2, approval from the board prior to a school site being named a community school. This next section provides a sample of a site selection process. One of the things we did have the opportunity to complete this year is a submission of the Department of Education Full Service Community Schools Grant in August of 2023. In that grant process, we did have to name 2 schools. So we implemented the school prioritization process, the site prioritization process, in this grant. I do want to give consideration to the fact that the grant specifically asks for Title I schools, so in the next few slides, you're only going to see names of Title I schools. The grant also required selection of 2 school sites, and they did show preference for feeder schools. So those were some of the reasons why you'll see the names you'll see on this next slide. Upon completing our site prioritization process, which includes scoring and weighting of each metric, we landed with total scores across our Title I schools as listed here. Inevitably, Annandale Terrace and Poe Middle School were identified and named in the grant as they had high scores and were feeder schools into one another as Annandale feeds into Poe. What I did want to note is also a second sample, and this sample is in the event that the preference for a feeder pattern was removed from this particular grant. In that case, we would have looked primarily at the schools that had the highest scores, which would have been Hibla Valley and Woodley Hills Elementary, here with the highest scores of 49 and 50 respectively. And so again, just the prioritization, the selection process would ensure including connecting with the administrators in this board prior to implementation. At that time, I believe we're ready for board discussion, questions, and feedback.
Great, thank you, board members. Because of our late start, we thought we'd go with, again, trying with 2 minutes, and then certainly a goal of go-backs for those who need it. And I do want to, again, draw the distinction here today. We are extremely mindful that 5 years ago, pilots were done because of outside organizations coming forward saying, we've got funding, we'd like to pilot this, and Fairfax County Schools and Fairfax County government had nothing. Montgomery County is probably 20 years ahead of us on community schools, is a national model that works. Staff has now shown us that through analysis and refinement, we're looking to improve the framework. As meeting managers, one of the things we talked about with Dr. Presidio is, this is, if you can imagine, a skeleton. That's it. This is the bones. The meat is not there. That is for Dr. Reed, county executive, staff on both sides to continue to develop and refine this. But I do hope that you can spend your questions asking both county and school staff where your concerns are. But if we don't move forward, which has been waiting already 18 months, I don't know when we're ever going to make progress in something we know is the essence of One Fairfax and the opportunity to ensure no matter what your zip code or background, you have an opportunity to succeed. So with that, on the list so far, I have Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. As a board member who actually at the time was the board chair and got surprised when one of my schools they did a big launch of a community school at Walt Whitman, and we were invited the day before for the launch and had not gotten any feedback on it or the why. I'm glad we're at least being consulted. I do have a number of questions, and I think in the form of constructive feedback, I would suggest that given from whence we came, where there was significant lack of information provided, where the CBOs have been given data and reports on a biannual basis for the past 5 years, those that have been supporting our schools, and none of that data has been shared with the school board members. I think that in the spirit of transparency, we do need to have a process that ensures that when things are happening in our schools, such as this, that there is a full debriefing and inclusion. I did not know that 2 of my schools were actually put forth in a grant this past summer. And being on your page, I forget what page it is, and I am older, so I do sometimes forget, but I don't remember participating in a structured interview process that was put on this. It may have been a, hey, we want to talk to you about this, but it was never put forth as being this structured interview. As somebody who 5 years ago had a conversation that did say, and I will need to go back, that I believed we should be doing that coordination in-house. I support the concept of coordinating in-house. I do think that what we need to see is a comparison of the old model, the new model, what the cost of the old model was, what the cost of the new model is, and where that money's coming from would be very helpful to have. Additionally, ensuring that there's some sort of reporting. I do know that it's a bit disconcerting when the schools that were identified as community schools did not necessarily perform as well as that on the metrics that we thought were important. So I'd like to know, what are the new metrics that we're going to actually put out, and how are we going to deal with that on a ongoing basis? And I will not support something that says we just roll to 25 schools without having gone back and tried to fix the model. And maybe, I don't mind expanding it, but to go from 3 to 25 seems a bit of a stretch without having some more beta testing.
So let me try to respond to a few of those comments, and I appreciate your thinking on this. There was a lot there, so I won't be able to touch on everything, so certainly we can do some go backs if we need to. First of all, I want to be clear. We're not proposing that we expand to 25 schools. What we wanted to, I know, I'm going to address it. Yeah, what we wanted to do was give the community a sense of where the needs were across Fairfax County. And if we just pulled out 2 or 3 schools and said these are the greatest needs, then we're going to have folks in other areas of the county say, well, I have schools that are needy in my area too, and where do they fall in the vulnerability index, and where would they fall in our thinking as a school system about being able to participate in this initiative? So we wanted something that was big enough in size, robust enough in size, that could be representative of the entire county, but we also wanted something that would really rank our schools in terms of the need that they have and would inform the process of making those selections. We will not expand this initiative unless we have a secure funding source. So we're not proposing to expand to any schools at this time. And we don't have a secure funding source, and we don't have a secure funding source because we don't have a board-approved and county-approved model. And until we can get that, we can't start looking at additional funding opportunities. So that's why it's critical that there's consensus, both with this board and the county board, ultimately on what the model is. So we're not looking to expand to 25 schools. We're not looking to expand anytime soon until we have a secure funding source. But what we are trying to do is make sure that the board is comfortable with the site selection process, understands your role in that process, and you would have the final say and authority over selecting those final sites. Now, we did have an opportunity to apply for a grant that occurred over the summer when the board was on summer recess. So we shared that information electronically in email to let folks know that we were going to apply for that. And again, if we received those funds, we wouldn't have to take the grant if the board didn't approve it. But we didn't want an opportunity, potentially, if the board would support it, and if we were able to get $2.5 million, we didn't want that opportunity to go by. So we haven't committed ourselves to anything, but we are trying to do our due diligence and make sure when we see resources and opportunities that we're exploring those opportunities. So I'll leave it there because you had a lot of other great points we could maybe come back to and some go-backs if you'd like to.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders, I know you had about 3 other questions. Can you quickly at least share 2 more that I think could be answered at this juncture?
I think the comparative analysis between the old model and what you're planning on is really critical, because I don't know what I'm approving and what I'm not approving. I don't know how you approve something if you don't have some general cost estimate. So I would like to have a better understanding of the cost estimate. And then in that prioritization score, which is how you identify 25 schools, it's not quite clear how each of those criteria are ranked. And I don't expect you getting all of this answered today, but those are the types of things that we should really.
Yeah, I think we can answer most of those today. So let me start, and Saray will help me with some of them. First of all, we were trying to keep the formal presentation brief. We didn't do a slide-by-side analysis of all of the different components of our current model and the proposed new model. But to be totally honest with you, and we have obviously the 79-page evaluation that was performed. We've got the 30-page guidelines for implementations of the community schools framework that gets at those in a lot more, that information in a lot more details. But to be totally honest with you, we don't have a model for community schools right now. We have 3 community schools that have 3 different models because we're working with 3 different community-based organizations. And that timeline that I showed, and we could go back and pull the slide up if we wanted to, we brought those schools on board before we had a board-approved and county-approved model. So we brought those schools on board because the community came to us and there were opportunities to try to bring in additional resources. It wasn't the best way to do it, but it's how we did it. And we're trying to fix that now with the adoption of a new model. So what I would say for comparative analysis is look more at what we're proposing in terms of the process and the model now as contained in these slides and in the document for implementing schools. The other thing I would say is we also want there to be some flexibility. So one of those 4 pillars that we mentioned is parent and community engagement. So while one school and one community may identify that they need certain services if we ask them, another school may prioritize something else. And I'm going to give you kind of a non-example because I think all community schools would probably want both of these things. But in one school, the community might want more on attendance support for students. Right? We see chronic absenteeism. That's an issue in our community. It's an issue nationally. One school might want to focus more on that and support more attendance support for students based on parental feedback. Another school might say, we need more after-school enrichment opportunities because our students don't have access to things that students in other parts of the county have. Now, I think both probably would be present in our model, but we're trying in our model to leave some flexibility for the parents to come forward and say, these are the areas that we really want to focus on in our work. And through our site selection process and the implementation of an MOU, an agreement with a community-based organization, we would prioritize those components that the community said are most needed. Our model's comprehensive. Again, it's academics, social, emotional, and health services. Those are the 4 components that we're looking at, primary components that we're looking at in our community schools model. Again, the degree to which a school could access or prioritize, the degree to which a school might choose to prioritize in some of those areas, we do want to leave some flexibility for the community to engage in that discussion. Do you want to add anything?
I also wanted to respond to the scoring and weights associated with the metrics identified for the site prioritization process. One of the documents provided to the board for this session is a site prioritizations process document that includes scoring and weights and multipliers across each metric. So that's how we came up with those numbers. It should be attached as a PDF in board docs when shared with the board. Is that incorrect?
Which document? I'm sorry?
It's called site prioritization process.
Yes, you should have that.
As a
It is-
PDF.
It's this one?
My apologies. Yeah, the link in
It's-
the presentation.
The presentation
There's an
isn't gonna work
additional
'cause it's-
attachment in board docs.
it's
It
a
looks like
PDF.
this.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Dr. Presidio, can you speak to the other part of Ms. Corbett Sanders' question, which is the cost? We understand that we didn't have a full model in place, so we can't have a comparison chart. But if you could give any ideas in terms of what does it cost currently and what could it cost in the future outside of the staffing that you've actually outlined here?
And that one is a little bit harder to answer directly, other than to say it's going to vary on a couple different factors. And first, let me say there's very little FCPS investment in this initiative right now. It's largely funded with some funds that we receive from the county and some grants that our CBOs are bringing forward. So we're really not investing much FCPS funding in it right now. The grant that, again, Saray really led that process to develop the grant in a short time period over the summer. We're looking at like over $1 million per school in terms of an investment that we think would be significant enough to really influence the types of tutoring services, enrichment services, attendance services, health services, again, that would make a difference for students. So the cost will be driven basically on how much service we're able to provide, right? And that's really going to be dependent on what types of funding opportunities we see. We're going to look at grant opportunities. We're going to look at partnerships with nonprofits. And ultimately, hopefully, when the board feels very comfortable in the model that we have and that it's working, in partnership with the county, we can look at some of our local funds from county and FCPS dollars. But we're not at that point just yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we call Ms. Cohen to be the next speaker, I just want to make sure that I reiterate is that giving consensus or permission here will open up the opportunity to develop MOUs, to put some other things forward. So a lot of these things are not fully fleshed out at present, but will be if and when consensus is provided. Ms. Cohen?
Yeah, I really appreciate this presentation. I think it's super exciting, and I love the idea that we're going to have a more unified model so that schools know what to expect and we have a little bit more fidelity. And so the community, I think to your point, that's exactly right. They should know what services to expect and how they're going to be delivered, and I think that this is fantastic. My one question when I was looking at the prioritization document that you had, just in the presentation, I think we have, I'm just going to use Braddock Elementary School. I know we have some schools who for years have been asking to become community schools. So Braddock, I saw, is scored very high using the components that you use. Also, even in the feeder, which I guess I didn't understand in the presentation, it highlighted, I'm scrolling, sorry. It highlighted Annandale Terrace and Poe as because they fed, but Braddock Elementary School, with the same points, also exclusively feeds Poe, unless there are students who have chosen to go to Canterbury Woods for AAP in 6th grade, and then those kids have the opportunity to go to Frost. So I guess my question was, why isn't Braddock Elementary School green?
It's a great question. Thank you. So it was interesting when we went through the grant process. We saw that both Annandale Terrace Elementary, Braddock Elementary, Lynbrook Elementary, and Forestdale, all feeding into Poe, had the same score. So my colleague and I, Susan, we went through and rescored their scores. So basically looking to see who had the weightiest 45 of those schools is the best way I could explain it. And of those, Annandale Terrace 45 score was heavier across the metrics that we were looking at. So I do think you bring up a good point. For this prioritization process, we may end up with schools that have similar or the same weights. How do we decide which school is selected over another? I do think the prioritization process helps with setting the stage of who's on the list, and then that consultation with the school admin, with the RAS, with you all, will help to further define and determine who's selected.
And just to add briefly to that, a couple things. One, a lot of these schools are really close, right? Like there's like 10, 12 schools between a 44 and a 46. So there's a lot of schools that are really close. The challenge that we had this summer to apply and be competitive in that grant is we needed a feeder pattern, and we only had a few days to figure out what were the right schools when we decided to apply for it. So ultimately, even now with this grant, the board has final authority to say, no, you didn't pick the right school. So if the board felt like we didn't pick the right school, we could always make an adjustment or a change. And with what we're proposing, the board will always have the final say before we select a school to become a community school.
And I guess what I would just say too is I think if you have schools that are primed and ready, I know this is a big adjustment for schools, some of them have, and I guess that's one thing I'd say about Braddock, have the system already in place, working with community partners and really interacting with all kinds of needs of the community, not just the school community, the larger school community. So I certainly would hope that as you go through, Dr. Reed, that this is, that coordinating with the principals, if you had a principal, I'm not dissing Annandale Terrace at all, I don't know them, so sorry, Annandale Terrace, but like if you have a principal and a system that is more poised and ready to go, I hope that that will weight them a little stronger. That's all I'll say.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Ms. Dernak Koufax, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. Dr. Presidio, as you know, you may not remember this, but I was the chair of SCIPT. Oh, you know. So I'm not going to go down that road, but just for conversation for this, I was the chair of SCIPT when I was told at a meeting that these things were started and they were coming to 2 schools in my district. That was done, I remember having a sidebar with the United Way outside as we were uncertain, and there was a lot of negativity around the start of this program, be where the school system was and where the county was, and how we got there. So I appreciate, Ms. McLaughlin, your desire and everyone else's desire to say that this is the way to go if we truly want to be one Fairfax. And in my heart, I believe that. But everything that's occurred over the last 5 years has disproved that. One of the schools was extremely successful. That was due particularly to the principal's support of that school. The other 2, I would say, I can tell you honestly, with extreme candid conversations, for those closest to these models, they have expressed deep concern about what had transpired. So I preface everything I'm saying from that lens and asking a couple questions. Where will the RASs have authority in this new process?
Well, before I answer that, let me just say a couple things. And I'm not one to pass the buck, but I am going to say I was not on Skipped at that time when we made those decisions. So I was not involved with the initiative, but I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. And I think you're articulating one of the major concerns that led to the study that we did back in 2022 to say we've got to have a better site selection process and we've got to have better communication. And the board needs to have final authority before we select a site. So we've included all of those things. Additionally, county and school staff have had conversations, very frank and candid conversations about that. Chris and I have had good conversations about it, and we know that, you know, we were moving pretty fast when we brought those schools on board, and we need to move more deliberately and slower in the future, which is kind of what we've mapped out here. So I think everybody was trying to do some good things with bringing those programs on board, but I do think we moved too fast, and I think we've been able to correct our process so we don't make those same mistakes in the future. Additionally, I would say you're absolutely right. And we saw in the program evaluation that we did and the content that Saray just provided, there's a lot of support in the schools for community schools, but there's also some of the concerns that you're raising. And the two primary concerns, two of the biggest concerns, I would say, when we talk about administrative staff, whether it's regions or principals in the building, RAS or principals, one is that there's not been oversight of the community-based organizations.
Correct.
Right? This model, as we're proposing it, fixes that. So there's a central coordinator and a site coordinator who has oversight as to what the community-based organization's role and responsibilities are and what the services they provide are going to be, which will be spelled out in MOUs or MOAs.
And that will be somebody in your office?
That's what we're proposing.
That's what I thought. I
That's
just
what we're
wanted
proposing.
clarity.
Yeah. Again, we're here sharing our proposals with the board, but that's what we're proposing, to be able to help with that oversight. And the region assistant superintendents are critical in working with the building principals in that regard. Dr. Ponce is here with us for this work session. He's listening as well. And I can assure you that the region assistant superintendents and principals, that would be one of the things that we would be working with, is to make sure they're comfortable with what we're doing in the school, and they understand that they have the supervision and oversight of what we're delivering.
Correct, because they have the most insight for that overall region and for the schools in that region. And they were left out of that process before. So thank you for speaking about CBOs and they will not have oversight. How will the opportunity neighborhood, and this is probably the county side, how will the opportunity neighborhood organization dovetail with this? Because I think they should.
So, again, Chris Leonard with the county, and I was on SCIP for the last 10 years. And I was here in February of 22, so I just got done dealing with some of the wounds from that discussion. So
I appreciate you, Chris.
Certainly. Let me just tell you that the last 18 months have been really positive moving forward to make sure that we don't make those mistakes we made before 2022. From Opportunity Neighborhoods standpoint, all of the Opportunity Neighborhoods are built on a backbone organization from our CBOs. That's why a lot of this work will dovetail very nicely into the work, because it's not like we are very blessed in Fairfax County with a bevy of very quality community-based organizations.
Correct.
However, it's not like we've got multiple within each area. And a lot of times we're dealing with the same backbone organizations. So the folks that we're working with in our Opportunity Neighborhoods are going to be the same ones that we're working with in this effort. And it's going to be something, why it's really important to include them as part of this is because that will be a part of the piece that we're looking to try to make sure that we can fund and help with from the county perspective when we go and talk to our board. When you see the box on that one infographic that I know will change, but the one infographic, and you see the county, you might as well overlay the CBO with the county, because we are nothing with our human services system. We are nothing without our CBOs.
Right.
So that's why it's important for them to play a role. Now, the role that they've been playing for the last 6 years, I think we all agree, that needs to change, and that's why this proposed model is so important, because we can start to build upon what probably should have been the case when we started this effort 6 years ago.
Thank you. I think that's very important because that was a critical missing piece, and it was supposed to be one of the foundational pieces because I have been on this board 12 years. So, I was here, as Ms. McLaughlin said, originally going to the Board of Supervisors and saying, we need something like Skipped with you and ensuring that this happens. And what I don't want to happen is I don't want you to have that bitter pill that I have because we did something that was for all the right reasons that turned out so not right. So I thank you for your thoughtfulness of this. I may have more questions, but thank you.
Just encourage you to break that rearview mirror, and let's just focus on the positive going forward. But your points are very well taken, and I think it's led to our lessons learned over the last 18 months.
Thank you. I do appreciate, and I do appreciate you. Thank you.
Ms. Tolan.
Yep, thank you. Yes, I'm excited to talk about this because I do believe that wraparound services are needed now, more than ever for so many of our students. And I think this is an avenue to potentially provide that. I know I just see my principals and staff at the schools doing heroic efforts to try to provide services to the students that they have, and they desperately need help. So like Ms. Cohen was saying, thinking of Braddock Elementary and their readiness to move into a program like this, as I've said many times, I have several schools in Herndon that could really, really benefit from this. So, I'm excited that we have people from the county here. How do we do this as a county-wide initiative? Because that's what we really need to do. I really appreciated Chris, you're talking about who is the CBO. That was super helpful for me because, we have an opportunity neighborhood in Herndon, and I just see the incredible work that these people do. We have, our neighborhood school readiness program. We've got so many incredible services that are available. How do we bring those to our school? And so I'm kind of curious, and you don't need to answer this right now, but could the CBO actually maybe be someone that's working at a pyramid level versus, and of course would work with each school, but it could be the same CBO for an entire pyramid, for example, or, for an area of the county, because that's kind of how our opportunity neighborhoods are, put together. One other comment I wanted to make is just looking at the report that you guys provided. Thank you so much for all of that. This kind of gets to it too. Page 11 in that overall report has a whole section on collaborative leadership, and really gets to using existing collaborative leadership structures. And I think that's what we're talking about here too, with who's the CBO and how do we incorporate opportunity neighborhoods, et cetera. The other comment I wanted to make on the report on page 11, you talk about required staff members to be involved in thinking about putting this together. And I really want to make sure that FCPS staff, like our parent liaisons and we have so many incredible programs here and there kind of scattered across the county are, for example, our parent literacy programs. People involved in those programs really are on the ground and understand what our students and families need. So they need to be at the table in this discussion. This truly is a budget conversation. As we move forward as to, how we're going to meet the goals of our strategic plan. Are we going to use some of these methods? Are we going to use other methods? Are we fitting different things together? This should be a priority item in our discussion of budget.
Ms. Tolan, I'm so sorry if you can wrap up your
time long gone.
Well over.
Okay. I'll save my next one.
You'll be put on a go back, Ms. Tolan.
Thank you.
Dr. Presidio, I know this is one of the things we discussed earlier regarding the role of parent liaisons into this process. Can you speak to that? I know there's hope that we can take advantage of any overlaps, but you also raised some, I think, reasonable concerns regarding that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And Dr. Anderson and I had some good conversation on this same topic in our meeting manager meeting. And the role of the parent liaison or the family liaison is critically important in this initiative, right? Sometimes those are the folks in the school who best know the student and family needs, have that trusted relationship, not with just that individual student or family, but perhaps that part of the community that they're representing. So they're critically important. Where I think we need to be a little careful is we don't want to put too much responsibility on them for delivering additional services. They already have full-time jobs or half-time jobs in the schools where they're not yet full-time. So this is really about adding additional staff capacity, whether it's through CBOs or FCPS staff, whatever the case may be. It's about adding additional capacity to do more than what we're able to do with our existing family liaisons now. But they're incredibly important to be part of that leadership team and provide insight and direction and support to this initiative. So I appreciate you, Dr. Anderson, and Ms. Tolan for pointing that out.
Thank you. I do not see any other board members, so I will take my turn. Then Ms. McLaughlin will have her turn. Oh, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, please go ahead.
Thank you, and I don't want to belabor many of the points that have been shared, and I think, to Ms. Darnat Koufax's point, I think some of the lessons learned from the past 12 years can really go into, I agree with, kind of being future-focused, but I think taking some of those lessons learned from the past 12 years, right, and really being intentional, and I think you all are doing that, about how to build out this program so it's consistent, so it's really meeting the needs of the schools that need it the most and building out from there. And, I do think there's also value in looking at, I know you said there's a strong 45 or a strong 46, I don't mean, but I do think there's also value in making sure that these programs are in different parts of the county as identified by schools, because, families, I don't know if there's open for families to be able to get some of these resources if their kids don't go to that school. Like if there's a possibility almost as a community center for resources that starts with that school's population but is accessible to others who may need it. I know so many times I hear from principals that they're like that first stop for families, right? Like honestly, public school is often where people first encounter government. And so families who are coming in to register their kids, they trust their principals, which is a great testament to our principals, right? But I hear from principals, people are asking me about this resource and that resource, and I wonder, if it's across in different parts of the county, some could even say, well, there's a community school here, or there's some resources there, even if it's not their school, might be helpful to all of our principals, even as we're concentrating on particular schools to build this model. So that's the first thing. The other thing I'd love to see built into this, and maybe it's not where it belongs, but I'm going to throw this out anyway, is a little more coordination with the county in terms of that soft handoff transition services to county services for special ed kids, because so often that's called going off that cliff. And so I think there's some room even for family to put some of that in there too, as we're looking at county resources. So what they currently need now, but also what we need going into the future. So, but I'm excited to see this, but just some thoughts into how we can make it accessible even beyond the schools where they're placed.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I wanted to offer a response to your first question about community schools, right, and its intention. I think our current model, community schools, is serving the community of those participating or attending the school, right? But in conversation with our project team, we've noted, is there opportunity to also provide service to those that maybe live in that area, but aren't attending that school, right? So doing exactly what you're noting. I think that's something that we need to discuss a little bit further, a matter of how to evaluate those individuals or track changes in their discipline status, changes in their SOL rates. We may not see the impacts just at that school site, but I do think that there is opportunity to consider that model as far as serving the larger community. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Frisch?
Thank you. So I appreciate very much that we are bringing potentially some structure and formality to this process. I think many of the schools that you envision us getting to this point with are already doing a patchwork approach to meet the needs of their kids. I think of Graham Road, which does a tremendous job and would be further helped by this. I also want to point out, that this is in alignment with our strategic plan, particularly the third pillar of helping to create a vibrant home, school, and community partnerships. and goals 2 and 4 for safe, supported, included, and empowered school communities and equitable access and opportunity. So I'm supportive. Obviously, I think there are some outstanding questions, just like there would be on anything of this size and scope, particularly around cost and such. But I've heard our skipped representatives talking about this for a long time in terms of the need to really zero in on this, and it's quite a legacy to be leaving for the school system. So, and I appreciate all the work the staff has done.
Thank you. Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also on skipped when we were talking about this around the time that you started. So it's great to actually see this come to where it is today and give it some structure and ability to move forward. I mean, I don't have any general issues with this. I think it looks fine. It's been thoughtful. I have some questions when we start to differentiate between the 45 and 45 and 45. So I think that is where, some of the more difficult conversations will come down to it. And I think we will have to take those as they come, because I'm not quite sure that there's any other particular data point that you put in there we've got great need. There's no way around it. So, yeah, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. I will take my turn, and then Ms. McLaughlin will take hers, and then we will go to go-backs, and I do believe we have a couple already. I think the general theme of the conversation here today is how do we, one, have the structure so that we have that increased accountability, and so that we have that increased transparency, so that we could really see the impact of this work in which there's significant investment. But I want to dig a little bit more in the survey that was provided. On slide 9, you talked about 3,000 families, 3,000 electronic surveys were distributed to students enrolling parents. Can you speak exactly as to who does that represent across these 3 schools?
Dr. Anderson, are you asking specifically about background, race, ethnicity, or?
No, not really. In terms of, are they parents whose students were recipient of this work? Because, just full disclosure, I'm a parent at one of these schools. Yeah. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you at all what that means to my child's experience. So maybe we were not the targeted group to participate in this survey. And that's why I want to have that confirmation.
Sure. So that survey did go out to all of the families, not just those that were noted as participants. Unfortunately, we don't know who's noted as participants, hence it being distributed to everybody at the school, at those schools. And so that's where we also see in the results, a lot of folks didn't have awareness or knowledge of the initiative in our findings.
And that is a significant point that I do want to underscore, because again, as a parent in one of these schools, not having robust information in terms of how it could be beneficial, not just to my child, maybe to others, maybe not my child at all, it's a bit of a disappointment. But I also want to speak to how this data is presented. Is it possible for this to be disaggregated? And I offer this because we have 3 schools that are funded differently and organized by different groups. So maybe one group is particularly more successful than another regarding this perception data. Is it possible for this to be provided by school per se? Because we also have a middle school versus 2 elementary schools. There are differences there that we could capture and really make more sense of the experience when the data is provided in a more granular level.
So I do believe that in the project report specifically, the results are shared by school. But in our presentation today, I want to make note specifically in the project findings, the data analysis portion, there should be differentiation of charts and graphs that show Whitman versus Mount Vernon Woods versus Glasgow. But in our write-up specifically, we do give more of an inclusive response to those findings across all school sites.
Thank you.
But if more is needed, we can provide it.
I will take a look at that. I'll put myself on a go back and go to Ms. McLaughlin.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to join the chorus from Ms. Darnett Koufax, being a member at the time. it was she and I, along with the two Board of Supervisors, including at the time Chairman McKay, that we were all blindsided and not knowing that we were going to pilot and start those. So the pain is real, but I really appreciate, Chris, that what you're saying is we want to absolutely honor, recognize, and learn from those lessons, but we've got to be forward thinking, or we'll never make this opportunity to move toward community schools. And it is a nationally recognized model for success in closing gaps and opportunities for kids. It's just that simple. The other thing I would say is, because Chris and I have worked now on two different initiatives, and Ms. Corbett Sanders was part of one of those as well, and that's the stadium bathrooms and the synthetic turf fields for our challenged communities who could not afford to get them on their own. And it was through a commitment of funds from FCPS and the County Board of Supervisors that we could collaboratively move forward. And I believe that this is a similar model. And so I do hope that we can embrace what this opportunity is here for today. The other thing is, Dr. Presidio, I know you were being asked about cost. I would just caution that as of now, the key cost we're looking at is a site coordinator at the school. That's the cost. So it's not $1 million right now. Depending on county services we bring in, community-based services and supports we bring in, FCPS already offers these services. So that's the $1 million price tag. I think, Dr. Presidio, we'd probably want to walk back a little bit and be, able to bring that back to the board. I've only got a second left, so I'll be doing my go back. But so certainly, Dr. Presidio, being able to flesh out a little bit more, it is the central office position, the site coordinator. It is recognizing the pilot. And one other thing I'll say to Ms. Corbett Sanders' concern, and it's where I feel passionately, without question, we go to our 3 pilots and we fix and model them on the new model. So I never thought we would leave them behind or leave them as is. I'll take my go back as well, but Dr. Presidio, if you want to comment on anything I said, or also Mr. Leonard, since I'm really big on the county partnering and dollars.
No, Chris has been great to work with on this initiative for sure. So again, we're not at that point yet of looking for new resources. And I think your points are well taken about the budget and the different budget factors that go into it. What I was referencing was the grant that we applied for, right? And in that particular grant, we were really looking at a significant level of services for students, right? So you can just imagine, like, the more after-school activities that you have, the more students that you can serve, the more money that you need to be able to do that to pay for those services. So a lot of the costs will be driven by how much service we're actually able to provide to students and families, whether it's academics, whether it's social emotional counseling services, whether it's health services. A lot of the cost factors would be driven by how much service we can provide. But you're absolutely right. We already provide a level of service. Mr. Frisch pointed that out as well. And really the first step would be in that coordinator position that you mentioned to make sure that we're consistently implementing the model from site to site.
Thank you. Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Thank you. On that last point, I would say that we should also be looking at what barriers we have to actually achieving what we're trying to roll out. For example, I know that there's been significant hiccups in rolling out tutoring services, one-on-one tutoring services at one of those community schools. And I would hope that we would do everything in our power to look at what is currently in place and how we should make it easier for people to actually provide those services. Similarly, page 50 and 52, it talks about the hiring of people. And I note that it does not include anybody from the chief of schools or the RASs in that process. And it seems like, since they're the ones who are being held accountable for what happens in those schools, I don't know how we don't have them listed as part of that hiring process. Third, on page 47 of your document, there seems to be a exchange between the terminology of memorandum of understanding and charter. And first off, we are not rolling out charter schools, it's my understanding. So I don't know why we have that language in there. Is that left over from a previous draft of this report? But it is quite disconcerting given where this school system is right now. And if we are rolling out charters, please let the board know so that we can make an informed decision of it. But along those lines, it has as the signatories on the MOU, let me see what the exact, it says it will include the Opportunity Neighborhood Core Team, technical assistance from them as their support, Skipped and Owen and the ON teams, and that it will be signed with an advisory committee. You know, so what I'm having a hard time understanding, and I would like a clear definition of, what do you perceive those MOUs to have in them? What is not going to be in them? And who are the signatories to them, and where's the approval process?
So a couple things I would say. I appreciate all of those points. One thing to note, I think the document that you're looking at is the 2022 program evaluation. And as I mentioned, some things have shifted and changed since then to what we're recommending now in that smaller document, which is the guidelines for implementing community schools. So you're pointing out things that may need to even be corrected in our current thinking, which I appreciate. So the first one that you pointed out was who would be involved in the hiring process and in the selection process. You know, at the time in 2022, we did not have a chief of schools. So, you know, we'll have to work with Dr. Ponce and figure out whether that would be him or whether it would be the region assistant superintendent. But we definitely want to include them in that decision-making process, as we talked about earlier. Secondly, and I want to be really clear for the community that might be listening, when we use the term charter there, we're talking about a type of document that would initiate services for a new program. We are not talking about charter schools. So again, to be very clear for everybody in the community, we are not talking about charter school applications here. We are talking about legal documents and agreements about what will be provided from the different entities that are part of this partnership, whether it's the county, whether it's FCPS, whether it's the community-based organization. And to the point of that you're making of actually drafting the MOUs, we're not at that point yet. And you raised some really good points that we need to consider when we get to that point. And obviously, we'd be working with legal staff at both the county and FCPS to draft those agreements. But the meat of the agreement would be roles and responsibilities. For example, what services would we be asking the community-based organization to provide? What support would we be providing? Who is playing what role? It would be those types of things that we would really memorialize in that type of agreement. But we're not at the point of drafting those yet.
So the question is, where's the evaluation and the approval process? Because when you're talking about the expenditure of over $1 million in many cases, when you add all these things together, and the commitment of resources, then that should come before the school board as a responsible party that will either approve or not. And so there should be some drafting in there because
that absolutely will happen. As I mentioned, though, we're not asking at this point or recommending that we expand to any new schools. So we've not drafted any MOUs for new agreements. But as I mentioned, any new site selection and any new agreement would come before the board and would require board approval before we entered into that agreement and ultimately chose that particular site. So that would come to the board.
And I
Thank
know
you,
my
Dr.
time's up.
Presidio. I'm so sorry. We'll try to see if we can get you a third in after we finish this round. Ms. Tolan, and then
me.
There you go. All right, thanks. A couple of other points I just wanted to bring up. I support the site prioritization process that you put together. I appreciated the weighting, et cetera. It was very thoughtful. And then kind of when you showed how it was applied this summer, I think it was kind of a reality check, and that schools I might expect to showed up, within the top 25. The only thing I appreciate all this, but and I appreciate the look at the feeder patterns, but I only saw one middle school even show up on the site selection process. So that might make that, feeder pattern more difficult. So I'd like to hear a little more about that. And I'd also, one thing that has not come up at all today is what about facilities and facility capacity in taking a look at implementing this? I know some of the things we've talked about at different points in time have been co-location of some amenities that families might need, like an eye doctor or, a clinic, or even if we're talking about after-school programs, those all require space and places. So I would like to hear how that might fit into choices.
No, thank you, Ms. Tolan. The first question that you had was around the middle schools on that chart. And remember, that chart is basically an academic exercise to just kind of sample and model how that site selection criteria would play out if we use Title I schools. And we only have a couple Title I middle schools in the division. So that's why we're not seeing more middle schools there, because we do have a number of middle schools that probably would meet a lot of this criteria if they were Title I schools. So that's the first thing. And your second point about facilities is definitely a major factor that we'd need to look at in the final selection process. Again, depending particularly on what types of services we're going to be provided in the community school. So there are some things that we can do, I think, that facilities would not be a barrier to. So after-school tutoring programs, enrichment programs, those types of things that, similar to what we might offer in our middle school after-school program. We don't need a lot of dedicated space for that. But if you start talking about things like dental clinics or, health clinics or things like that, facilities obviously would be a major factor that we would need to look at.
The only other point I wanted to make was, Herman is a good example where the middle school is located kind of in the center of the town. And so back to this idea of, the CBOs and how that might work. Many of our families live very close to the middle school, even though the kids may attend elementary school, middle school, high school. Families might have kids in all three locations. So I would like that, to be something we might think about as far as how we could efficiently provide services for families within communities and, using that opportunity neighborhood framework as well.
No, that's a great point, and we definitely can do that, so thank you.
Thank you.
You manage your time very well. You had 1 second left.
Yay.
My next question is regarding the site prioritization process, and it's just very quick. I'm very grateful for this form because it shows which factors are weighted more than others. And you have your primary factors and your secondary factors, and most of them, it's pretty easy. The number is what it is, school attendance and free and reduced meals. But can you speak a little bit to the ones that are not necessarily sourced from us, such as the vulnerability index, which is coming from the Fairfax County index, as well as the student connectedness and the low rates of family engagement? I'm very curious to hear more in terms of how that's calculated. Anyone? Going once.
Oh, we're coming. We're just pulling up the paperwork.
I wanted to be able to know which characteristics are identified within that vulnerability index. I have them here. I'll read them for the record. School facilities, school attendance area, households without a vehicle, populations of color, populations without health insurance, medium household income, burdened renter households, population who speaks English less than well, and population with low education attainment are all considered in that vulnerability index. So it is a multi-tiered measure that's not just specific to the school site, but that specified area. Did you want to add, Chris?
And I'll just add that vulnerability index is utilized by the Health and Human Services system to target resources. Before, let's say before COVID, we were trying to distribute resources in more of a equal fashion. And obviously with our adoption of One Fairfax, I know both boards adopted that, trying to just develop.
Your mic on.
Yeah, I think it's on. I've never been told I don't have a big mouth. Wow. Thank you, first of all. But I believe that that the vulnerability index is core to our one Fairfax targeting of resources. And frankly, it's one of the things when we were going over this presentation, I was most intrigued by, because I believe that what we're trying to do here with the community schools, especially with site selection, and I'm going to stay out of it because I'm county, I get that, but with site selection, I think that is core to our One Fairfax mission, to target resources where they're most needed. And I completely agree with what was said earlier. We have a lot of need in the county, but we target the resources to where it's most needed, and that's what that vulnerability index is all about.
Dr. Anderson, I also wanted to give comment to the student connectedness and the low rates of family engagement. Both of those are facilitated through surveys that we process here in FCPS. So that student connectedness is related back to our Fairfax County Youth Survey, specifically looking at those students that are reporting having 2 or fewer assets and protective factors. So we've used the 3 to Succeed model. We know that if students are noting that they've got 3 quality folks that they can connect with, they're more likely to succeed academically and socially. And so we're seeing that as a metric of consideration. They need more connectedness to the school and to their community. With the low rates of family engagement, there are a number of items in that family engagement survey that FCPS provides. We were specifically looking for rates of agreement as it relates to collaboration with the community. One noted there, I receive enough information about community services that help families. That's a specific item we were looking at in that family engagement survey that's provided to all school sites.
Thank you for that. That is very helpful. But for the low rates of family engagement, I wonder how many of our families are not engaging by completing the survey in the first place. And I know you can only capture what you can capture, but it is definitely a wondering. Thank you.
Okay, I will take my go back. I guess what I would ask Mr. Leonard, what has been your sense in talking with either the county chairman or the county executive, their sort of more macro level viewpoint on proceeding with this investment in community services or
Absolutely.
the community schools?
So it hasn't been recent, but I will say that over the last, let's say, 18 months, the message is completely consistent because of the missteps in the past, rearview mirror, that we are completely hands-off to the extent of moving forward until this board adopts a consensus that this is the model that we want to pursue. Once we get to that point, then we can start engaging broader to certainly our Board of Supervisors as well, but that is in lieu of the, or in recognition of the missteps that have been made in the last probably 5 years, I would say. We wanted the hands-off from the county perspective to the extent that we've been able to partner. And I will say, these 2 individuals are gold, and the collaboration that we've had with the county has been just wonderful. So you should know that as well with the staff that are working on this. But we're certain and we're clear, crystal, that we're not moving forward from our perspective until this board acts and makes sure that this board is comfortable with the model.
Thank you. I know when I think about the various partnerships we have with the county government to serve our children and families, we can look at the school age after school care program run by the county, but it is co-located in our schools. When we have looked at our support and funding on our school nurses, which they became school nurses instead of clinic aides, again, through county investment. The school resource officers, another program supported and brought into our schools through our county partnership. When I think about also our commitment through the JET, the Joint Environmental Task Force, these are all examples of where the school board, the board of supervisors, and the governing bodies have recognized that collectively, when we can do this coordinated effort to serve our populations, we do better for our families and our residents. And so I do very much appreciate anyone who's ever watched my term on the board. I ask very targeted questions. Trust but verify. I can love an idea, but I don't like the design or the execution, and I will speak very strongly for that. So, yes, haha. So I really do want to say to my colleagues, even when I have pushed back on them, I value that we want to vet this. What I still hope, however, is that we will come out of this work session recognizing that this is just another step forward. We are not signing off here and forever forward. And there will be budget implications that will absolutely be under the two boards' authorities and purview. But this has been 18 months, and I hope that we can allow this to be moving forward. So with that, I believe, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you had one more go back. And I don't see anybody else at this time, so then we'll talk about next steps.
So I'm glad you used the term trust but verify, because that is precisely, and Chris, you know where I'm coming from on this, having dealt with how the last set was rolled out. And I would like to understand better from you all how we can verify that you're actually going to continue not only working together, but that you're going to include this board in your decision-making, and that there will be funding that follows it, because we're hearing that it's going to be a tough budget year. So all of a sudden, if we're rolling out things and then we don't have funds to follow it, that causes a little bit of angst for me, because we'll be cutting something else. So I'd like to better understand that. I would also like to understand, and I would suggest or Dr. Presidio, that you might want to look at your fall of 23 document. It uses the exact same terminology. It was not just a mistake in 22. And so it should be updated to remove any reference to establishing charters and not having some sort of board oversight. So when you're talking about an MOU, it needs to have a clear recognition that this board needs to be part of that process. And I'm a big believer. I ran in support of community, wraparound services in our schools. I believe that we are better together, but we just need to do it the right way. And we have to have clear metrics that if it's not working, how do we adjust? And then the other piece of it is, what happens when the schools change over time? The risk measures change. Is there a sunset clause for community schools, or are we keeping them in perpetuity?
So again, a lot of good questions. I appreciate that. I think, what I would say on the first point that you made about collaboration is, as Chris has mentioned, the collaboration has been really strong. I have no reason to think that would change. I think we have the assurance that this is one of the strategic initiatives of the SCIP, right? And as long as that's true and as long as that's the case, there's oversight from both boards, as well as a lot of involvement from community-based organizations and leaders on this initiative. So I'm very sure, I feel very confident that collaboration will continue. The evaluation, as we mentioned in the report, we'll do annual evaluations to share information with both boards about the current successes and challenges of the community schools initiatives. And based on those conversations, we can take direction from both boards about improvements that we might need to make.
That's part of the answer. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I can say ditto. I think the coordination through SCIP is really important here, because it's one of the 5 core initiatives that the expectation from our SCIP members, which again includes not just a third county, a third schools, but also a third to community. And the community will hold us accountable for those initiatives and driving us forward there as well. So I have no qualm saying that this is an initiative that coordination and collaboration will remain strong. I can't speak to our board until we get this in front of our board in terms of talking about funding opportunities and what they'd like to see. But I know I'm eager for that conversation, because we're all so committed to this. I think we need to get back to where not forgetting, learning from the past, but always remembering those outcomes that we're all trying to achieve with regards to the wraparound services for these kids and their families. The kids and their families. And I think this model is really strong to be able to make sure that we've implemented our lessons learned and we're ready to move forward.
So my concern is that we actually don't fully have a chart that says these are the lessons learned and this is what we're going to correct. And so if, as the next step, you all would provide that to the boards, I think that's critical. The second piece is, a confirmation somewhere that there's that loop back beyond SCIP, because SCIP is not a decision-making body. The two boards are the decision-making bodies. So I would just ask for those to be addressed. And then you didn't answer the last piece, which is there a sunset mechanism? Is there something that you say, okay, over time, we're not going to do this at this school anymore?
I think that's a great point. That was kind of implicit in what I was trying to say, is that through that annual review process and taking feedback from the boards, if we were seeing, right, and I think it would take some time for us to get to that point, we're certainly not there now, that in the most vulnerable communities in Fairfax County, that had shifted and changed, and we had such an impact there that those services weren't necessary. Absolutely, that could be part of the discussion with the boards.
Thank you, Dr.
Wait, they didn't answer the one question regarding.
Correcting the document so that it doesn't have charter with a capital C.
We're happy to do that. I
includes a reference to the approval by the board.
Yes.
By the boards.
I think there are a number of.
That's in there, but we'll triple
I think
check.
there are a number of things that Dr. Presidio and team should be taking away from this conversation, because I think there was a lot of discussion in terms of accountability, the role of the regional superintendents, the annual review.
Well, Susan's got like 7 pages of our takeaways in her notes here.
Super.
So, yeah.
So maybe that can just be incorporated and updated documents are provided to us, because I think people just don't want to speak into the ether, but actually want to see the action.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that so much. Ms. McLaughlin, do you want to take us through the consensus?
Yes, before I do, I did want to invite our superintendent to just have some remarks before we go to next steps.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. And I do know the power of community, right? Learning happens best in community. We've said that. I've said it since I arrived. And the power of community schools, when done well and systemic and accountable, is a powerful force for good for our young people. And I think we've also heard from our staff that wraparound supports would be helpful as well in terms of the student experience. And we really need to have a strong partnership with our county partners, because so many of the needs of our students and families go so far beyond the classroom. So I'm looking forward to supporting a new iteration of community schools with a focus and being able to celebrate successes moving forward. So I appreciate staff, Saray, appreciate you shouldering so much of this, and Sloan as well. This is, it's hard too when you're presenting a concept that maybe hasn't gone as well as we might have hoped. And I think it's fair to say we would agree with that. So I think this is a chance for a reset, and we don't get many of those chances. So I hope we're able to make the most of them. So thank you, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. And, again, I do want to just again reiterate to the board as a body, as someone who's been on SCIP throughout, we humbly recognize that it is the two elected boards that have authority. The SCIP is not an authority. It is a policy team. It's in its name. But we recognize that all we can do is make recommendations to the two boards. And so duly noted on that, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. With that, if we go to the slide where we just, again, framed out for the board, maybe it was the first slide, just the overall ask, which is, as Dr. Presidio said, that we would like to have consensus of the board in support of the program model, roles and responsibilities for the partnering organizations, and number 2, the process for site prioritization and selection. Again, this has been a public meeting, a recorded meeting. A lot has been committed to and explained. So This is not a speak now and forever hold your peace, but we do, I hope, have an opportunity here to green light to the next step, let this get brought to the Board of Supervisors. So board members, I'm going to break it up into two pieces, and I would like for you to vote in showing consensus support. Number one, on the community schools program model, that you support what has been presented and discussed going forward to the Board of Supervisors for our future engagement. And I see Ms. Corbett Sanders, you have a question.
With amendments or with those qualifications that we discussed today.
I guess what I would say is, if you want to outline to Dr. Presidio exactly what you view as this has to be changed, or I'm not giving it support.
Yeah, I heard some technical edits, probably most importantly, the authority of the board and the charter component that we need to revise, and we're happy to do that.
Okay, great. Yes, Ms. Fairfax.
When do you anticipate that the Board of Supervisors will review this? Does anybody know?
I'm not in charge of them.
No, I know, but I just thought in the conversations,
Really,
like,
this would come as part of the Health and Human Services Committee.
okay.
And I don't know when the first one is in 2024. We only
okay.
have one more, and it's next Tuesday. This won't be on that, so. it'll
So a
be at
little
some
bit down
point.
the
A
road,
little bit down
next
the
in the
road.
new year.
Right.
All right,
It'll be
thank you.
2024, definitely.
Again, the question from Ms. Corbett Sanders was, why now then? It's because we've already waited 18 months. They've been waiting on us for 18 months. We have our board calendar. The chair and vice chair have set it. So if you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for it. But at this point, I have fought to get this on our work sessions for a year and a half. So we're here. I hope people can feel comfortable to send this forward. It doesn't stop any individual board member from talking with Dr. Presidio, Saray, who have been, again, very collaborative in saying, that they want to hear from board members. Yes, Ms. Corbett
My
Sanders.
question is that before it goes to the Board of Supervisors, those amendments, those corrections that we talked about today will be made
Those corrections will be made this week,
before it goes to the Board of Supervisors.
well in advance before it goes to the
That's
Board of
what I'm
Supervisors.
trying to understand. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, my colleagues, if you could please raise your hand if you can support for number one, the program model to be forwarded on to the Board of Supervisors with a green light from the school board. I have Mr. Frisch, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, myself, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Corbett Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, and Ms. Tolan, who are present at the meeting. Ms. Marin is away from the table. And Ms. Keys-Gamarra is not here, and neither is Ms. Omish. I just said present. So unanimous for everybody's present and participating. Number two, for the forwarding the process for site prioritization and selection, please raise your hand if you can be supportive of that. I have Ms. Tolan, Mr. Frisch, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Pekarsky, myself, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Corbett Sanders, and Ms. Derenak-Kofax. Again, unanimous for all who are present and participating in the meeting. So there we have it. I want to thank our county partners for coming here today and helping to answer board questions. And I want to especially thank you for the more than 5-year journey we have had in trying to develop community schools. And Dr. Presidio and Saray and all of your staff who've worked on this. Thank you, all three of you, for being present and the work you've done behind the scenes. I look forward to the few remaining months I have to continue to champion our community schools. So with that, we're done, colleagues. See you at 5. Yeah, see you.